Well, everyone, I'm happy to talk about anything. There were a few things from last week that I would enjoy to speak on. Though, one of the things we talked about last week is the relationship between freedom and choice. And that one of the reasons we struggle to think new political and social possibilities today is because we conflate freedom and choice. When really freedom and choice are actually more like opposites, in a way. And now I have to explain what I mean by that. But just to start, the moment I choose something, I've limited options, right? I don't have as much freedom as I had. And one of the things we talked about is Mr. Luber, good to see you, is that the current form, and Mr. Jockin had a wonderful Substack on this, the current form of liberalism, the theory of liberalism, which again I noted last week, I would argue that a lot of what people are reacting against as liberalism overlooks the debate that was occurring at the heart of quote unquote liberalism, that actually there were kind of two directions you could almost say it could go in. One was an emphasis on the moral imagination, Russell Kirk, people like that. I'll throw it to Dimitri here, versus the Washington consensus that is more libertarian. At the end of the day, you can argue the Washington consensus libertarian view won out. The Francis Fukuyama markets will address thymos and offer those sort of means of social recognition is what we went with. And perhaps for a time in the 90s and et cetera, so forth, it bore much fruit. But then, of course, with 2008 and more, and of course, just the failure of institutions in general and social pathologies, there is a sense that that form of libertarianism is lacking something, is missing something. What we discussed last week is basically it conflates freedom and choice, where if you have more choice, then you are free. And furthermore, there's then incentives in the structure to hurry you along into making choices, not to notice the difference between freedom and choice. And what we said is someone like Nick and others are basically saying, no, I refuse to enter Washington consensus in your view, and actually in a way that increases freedom. Because you're saying, I don't have to interpret the society the way that you are interpreting it, which is actually an act of freedom, but it is an act of freedom in denying the choices on offer, which is a certain contradiction based on our conflation of freedom and choice that opens up possibilities that are simultaneously terrifying and that we perhaps lack the mental resources to think. And Daniel, wonderful to see you again, sir. I enjoyed last week, and we're talking a bit on that. But actually, in that terror of opening up the distinction between freedom of choice, that is the space in which we need to think new political possibilities. We then talked about E.O. Wilson in The Fire, social intelligence, mammals versus dolphins, because dolphins are fun, and the movement of dolphin evolution as autonomous rationality, which sounds so funny to say that I just love saying it, that actually is completed in the fungibility of the commodity form. We did note that there are things to add to this arc on the Protestant Reformation. We can also get into the 1800s with fungibility, capital versus social, and things like that. And the other topic that I think is worth bringing up, although again, we can discuss anything on this fine day, is actually, I think, one of the most overlooked topics of philosophy, as weird as this sounds, is the role of presuppositions in philosophy. And presuppositions are words like in, that, from, with, to. And very often philosophy has emphasized words like freedom, justice, equality, and so on, but it has overlooked these words like to, with. However, I would argue freedom to is very different from freedom with versus freedom as versus freedom in. And actually, those terms are incredibly important because they give us a sense of the quality of the relation or the activity carried out in the value. And by underthinking these presuppositions, we've prepositions. It's a difficult word to say, that we end up actually in trouble. Now that has to be expanded on, but I'll stop and throw it to Dimitri on this fine day. Dimitri, good to have you, sir.
Yeah, good to be here. And immediately, I think the themes you've laid out are the start of a good conversation. So yeah, very relevant, very eternal, also very contemporary, very timely. And yeah, I just want to express something here that for the last weeks that I have been coming on to the net on and off. Um, I honestly think I wouldn't survive university without the portal, without the net, and without like my friends, and also what I'm seeing happening on the internet that helps me to get back to myself and think. Because yeah, it's really worrisome where these institutions have ended up, and I'm not really I know I'm quite I can be a hyperbolic person, but here I'm really not hyperbolic. Like if it wasn't for these things, me as a young man, I would have been forced to leave, honestly. I would not, yeah, I wouldn't be able to stay there. Uh, because it's definitely a hostile environment, which is why I censor myself there all the time. And yeah, well, sometimes I'm quite naive. I'm a very naive person, so sometimes I forget to censor myself, and I just say what I think. Or and yeah, today I had such a moment at university. I expressed that I had a fundamental disagreement with the theory that we are talking about, not to shut down conversation, but to show, look, there's also, people like me, and I think differently about it, and there's other things, and you know, someone asked me what I thought of it, so I thought, okay, I'll just tell you. And well, when I expressed that I had a fundamental disagreement, people were just laughing at me in this cynical way of like, oh my God, Luke, he thinks that's something. And I mean, yeah, I knew like I kind of like stopped talking because I knew like, okay, that's it, that's it, that's where I'm at. So yeah, I mean, when I came home, obviously I was kind of worked up about it. Um, but yeah, no, I forgot to censor myself, and yeah, I think so. I basically I think I just have to keep living with this split of that when I'm at uni, I just have to have no expectations, but somehow I don't want to be fully closed and cynical too. Like for example, like when you meet new people, like of course, most people are boring and they're quite shitty, but once in a while you'll find some dude or a woman or whatever, some older person or a younger person that actually surprises you. Like, wait, you're really cool. So I want to retain that openness, but I think that's yeah, I don't know. So sometimes that means I'll probably keep forgetting to censor myself, but I think I'll be able to get better at it. Um, and yeah, so uh, I don't know any strong man at my university that I look up to. Literally none. Literally none. Like I've made one, yeah, I've made one male friend there, and yeah, I mean, at least I can share with him the crazy things that are happening there and in society in general. But and I mean, one good friend is in a hostile environment means a lot, right? That means a lot. But for the rest, yeah, like I don't know like how it was 20 years ago or 30 or whatever, but I feel like all uh, they have been cleansed away. Like the people that should have been there, that were there, probably they have been cleansed away and they have been forced to exit. Maybe I'll be surprised down the line. Maybe down the line I'll be thinking how naive I was that I that I thought that I could be surprised. It is too early to say yet, but yeah, I it's uh it's very worrisome, I think. It's very worrisome. Like it's I'm and the thing is I'm watching uh Carl Benjamin, like maybe you guys know him, Sargon of Akkad on the internet, and he's talking about this stuff of feminization and the so, so we talked about it last time too, like joking. I remember we had this interaction and you were talking about like when you know someone's position on abortion, you also know what they think about the whole range of topics, right? And so if you see a she, her in pronouns in the profile picture, you already know what she thinks about LGBTQ plus, and it's like that kind of stuff. And I just I feel like no. So what I've been seeing is that a lot of men are deciding not to go in university. I've actually recently talked with a guy who's he got out of university and he was saying to me, "Are you insane?" Like, like I tried it and I went out because I couldn't bear it. And I told him that, well, actually, I mean, I have some reasons that I'm going there, but uh, Yeah, like the men, they have turned around, they are turning around, and they will more and more keep turning around. I'm talking about my generation and the men before me also, and maybe a bit older men too. There's a lot of boomers who are totally like oblivious to what's happening, which is fine. But okay, women, on the other hand, oh God, they will double down. I'm just, I see a complete obliviousness to the problems. Um, an impossibility to enter into a conversation because it would break the entire framework and the ideas that their identity is based on and their whole social environment is based on. And so I believe, yeah, young women, they will more and more double down. Like the ones who have money will use more and more Botox. The ones who maybe don't have money and don't believe as much in their looks will become more and more trans, will get more hormones. And I mean, they're mutilating themselves. They're mutilating themselves, and they're turning into men, a lot of them, because they are also probably like me, not seeing any men. And I do hear girls like my age and younger say, "Where are all the men? Where are all the men?" And I agree with them. I agree with them. But okay, no, but I do seriously think they will double down on, you can call it woke, you can call it the left, you can call it the progressive status quo. Uh, but I find it so worrisome because I mean also the role of motherhood, because within that kind of feminized paradigm, I'm saying it's feminized, but it's I mean it's anti-feminine because it's also against motherhood, and it sees motherhood as having a low social status because you should go for your career and be independent and go to the gym by yourself and then go to the gym and then have wear a bikini, and then you're like offended when men look at you. But I talk to women, I'm not alienated from them. I ask them, how does it go at the female gym? Do the women just wear bikinis there? And it turns out, I mean, people can correct me if I'm wrong, but from the women I've talked to, they are saying no, the women actually don't wear bikinis at the female gym. So they just want to be pretty and cute for themselves when they're with men, which is, of course, yeah, it's adorable. So yeah, I mean, I'm glad I can even speak this shit because if I'd say this at uni, I'd probably just get scapegoated anyway. So yeah, I would like to talk about the like freedom and choice and how it relates to sexual difference and especially intergenerationally today because that's really a worry of mine.
No, I think it all relates, and I appreciate you sharing all that, Naspasia. Wonderful to see you. Well, there's a few things. First off, I will certainly say that, um, in my experience, also, like the majority of men I ran into, there was something very problematic with at universities. I was very lucky. I often think about how fortunate I was to basically, one, have my grandfather next door, where I, as a man, was basically introduced to older men in a conversation culture. Where Mr. Dillard at the Big T. Most men don't get, most men, I would say, the main thing that men don't have that I think then women can react to is the ability to converse, to speak. They can't put their feelings into words. They don't know how to talk, and the older men in their life have not taught them how to speak, right? And they also have had not professors and teachers that have valued learning to speak. Most of the men in their life have said you need to get a good job that pays for things, so you need to learn skills. And in fact, if you're talking, you're not working. So why are you doing that, right? Which then leads a kind of an intimacy gap. And then if people can't talk with one another, well, then screw it. I'm just going to like win my game. I'm going to get power and status. What else can you do, right? So we were talking, and we've been talking about it, and thank you for what you said about the net and philosophy portal and spaces like that, Dimitri. I appreciate that a lot. And we've been speaking at Philosophy Portal, and I know I've been repeating this, but I just think it's very true. So much of what we are seeing in the world today are reactions to the feeling of weak speech, the inability to speak in a manner that has authority, that can draw the conversation to a close, which, of course, psychosis is what develops when you have weak speech, right? The neurotic in Lacan is trying to, create authoritative speech again. And, the perverse can be more on simply enjoying that ineptitude or enjoying sort of the deranged, etc., right? So we live in a world of psychosis and neurosis, but I think basically the average person between male and female there's this feeling of weak speech. Men don't know how to talk. Women don't know how to talk. So then it becomes the simulacra. It becomes the image, right? Because images seem easier to articulate than words, right? An image of a bikini, an image of a guy at the gym seems more capable to create strong speech than words, right? But it always comes back to, I always think Pascal and Kierkegaard were right when they said, basically, all the problems of the world can be boiled down to the fact that people can't sit alone together for 3 minutes in a room. And Michelle and I talk about that all the time. Like when we were dating, like if there's one thing you want to be able to do with someone you love, is speak with them. Because that's probably what's going to define the majority of the day, right? Not going to the movies, not going to the park. That all costs money, by the way. Talking is a lot cheaper and it's a lot more financially sound, right? So the ability to, in dating, dare I say, identify someone of whom, in speaking with, you lose track of the time. You don't know what goes by. That ability to genuinely converse with someone is the critical sign of the possibility of intimacy. And this applies to friends, this applies to relationship, et cetera, and so forth. And I think basically the masculine going in the Ferentes move, the masculine going maybe just hard in tech bros, or the feminine going into the direction they're going to. And all of these are just ways to deal with the trauma of not knowing how to talk, weak speech, right? But of course, gaining the ability to speak requires, like where Seth talks about eraspasia, like going into the body, working on the nervous system, going into the dark traumas of the past, breathing, as Daniel talks about. All of these capacities, which I would argue are necessary for freedom in, which is an important, as we were talking about last week, freedom in choice, freedom in versus from or to. All of these are in the gambit. And these are not taught, and these skills are not there. So people feel weak in their speech. And when they're weak in their speech, nobody likes feeling weak. So they overcompensate with being overly aggressive, like the Nick F you or the feminist F you. All of this is a kind of F you, right? And that's the only way you know how to respond to the feeling of being unable to have strong speech. And the key component as well, and then I'll give it to Jockin and Mr. Luber. The key,
Can I just respond
please,
quickly?
yes, Dimitri, please.
Okay, so I'm studying linguistics, right? And it is a science and it's also not a science. I'm not really, I have some more years to be able to think about what I really think about this. I can't say now, but today's linguistic paradigm is totally ahistorical and impersonal. So what you get is like that dynamic, what you're describing, weak speech and then overcompensating with aggressiveness. I'm seeing that with science. I'm seeing that with linguistics, that people use the scientific paradigm to shut down conversations and to turn everything into an ahistorical, impersonal thing and it's the big other. It's kind of they just beam the ahistorical knowledge to you, and you just have to say yes, and then maybe add another thing, and then you get this external cognition, which Hegel talks about, where nothing ever coheres into each other. It's just this and this and this and this. But yeah, I just wanted to add that.
That's extremely important because I don't think it's by chance that a lot of, dare I say, the aggressive, I want to say woke speech, but, followed a scientism, followed a certain sort of, that because that was going on in the late 2000s, and there was more of the data, show me the science. New Age atheism was part of this sort of like, if you don't have evidence, don't even open your mouth. That then led into a reaction against that because, but actually they're kind of two sides of the same coin. And what I mean by that is the key paradox, if you will, is that strength is going to feel weak if you can't end it. Like you can't bring it to a close. Like if two partners are talking and they're not able to reach an end point, a feeling that makes them feel saturated or complete, it's like, yes, we had a conversation, then the speech feels weak. So the weird move is that speech only feels strong if you can end it. Which in a way, wouldn't that be weak speech? Speech that ends? No, if it has no sense of an ending, it has no sense of a point, it has no sense of an ability to speak ourselves to a consensus and create intimacy. So you have to end speech to make speech feel worth it. Well, I can give you a simulacra of that by shutting down every conversation with evidence, facts, data, show me the evidence. And then we associated being educated with research, meaning, no, we don't need speech. We just need data. And in fact, if you're speaking, you're not good at your job. You're just supposed to have the data, which was a simulacra of dealing with the problem of weak speech because you end speech, don't you? But there's a big difference between ending speech at the beginning of the conversation and ending speech at the end of the conversation. And if you don't learn how to end speech at the end of the conversation, you're not going to get intimacy, you're not going to get relationship, you're not going to get humanness, and you're not going to be able to talk about what I would argue are the most important things in people's lives, which are working through their values, their beauty, their first principles, all of those things you have to go through a conversation to get to. And I would argue that the social coordination mechanism is a technology that is giving people the ability to train this capacity. Because without this capacity, it will be impossible to have a polis. So then what ends up happening is and this is kind of the irony. This is why there's a way that modernity and postmodernity are actually two sides of the same coin. So there was a reaction against the scientism with an assertion of individual identity, say in terms of personal experience, race, women, you mentioned all of these things, right? Which in a way you would go, well, that's great, because that's reasserting the personhood that actually is necessary for intimacy. But if it's actually done in a manner that shuts down speech identical to scientism, well, then that's no good, right? And then if you've had decades of religion shutting down speech because that's not what Jesus said and you're a heretic, so you have all of these different fields that actually have engaged in habits of shutting down speech that seem different, but all of them are actually simply different reactions to a feeling of the inability to create strong speech, which is speech that is able to end, right? So rather it be in religion, rather it be in woke, rather it be in politics is no different, of course. What is populism but basically a shutting down democracy? Because you don't believe in democracy. Well, why is that? Because you don't believe in the possibility of political discussion, substantive conversation, right? You're shutting it down. All of these are actually all in that way isomorphic. Even though they debate and they're arguing with all of them are actually the same in that they are dealing with how to end speech. How do we end speech? The problem is they're all the same because they're ending speech at the beginning of speech, not on the other side of speech. Because men don't have elders that have taught them how to do it. There aren't communities where women are learning how to do it. Children are not being brought up in school to know how to do it. We live in a world where we are not taught how to talk. We don't have oral education. We're taught how to research. We're taught how to get jobs. We're taught how to get the paycheck, but we're not taught how to speak. And the irony is, if you actually don't learn how to speak, you lose all of those things, because C.S. Lewis was right. If you don't put first things first, you don't get second things either. And so we've unfortunately embarked in a strategy that has proved self-defeating. But let me throw it to Jockin and then Mr. Luba. Mr. Jockin, please.
I mean, everything Dimitri's saying, I can verify my own personal experience from teaching, and I could see empirical data, like via statistics and all that, is very useful when it corresponds with experience, right? So it just it verifies what you're experiencing. I think what was because people tripped up is when it's the inverse, when you have the empirical evidence and it's, oh, your experience of reality is actually wrong. That's where this I think is an interesting point. But that's just a tangent note, because the larger point is, yes, the male absence from academic space, this has been going on for a long time. And in the creative fields especially, this has been going on for 30 years, I would say. Generally, the population gender distribution in school in classes has been gendered women for about 20 years, 30 years. Now that was in the creative fields, and I think it's been across the board now in almost every field at this point. I think we're very rare exceptions in some particular fields. But that's, again, just that's a separate note. But the question is, where are these men going? And I think the idea there is no, what is a man? And that is an open question. It actually, the very fact that's not a self-obvious principle, it's kind of suspicious. It should be. And the fact that, quite frankly, and on some gender discourse, you could argue women are just trying to become men. Like their mode of actuality in this political discourse is to become men. Meaning being employed, don't have children, right? Express sexuality in a male gendered way, male expressional way, archetypically. The point is, but then it's interesting that men are left in this complete absence space. Again, it depends which political discourse we want to use or which framing about that. I'm just speaking to, because the point is, I only say this because Daniel made a comment about having a grandfather, right, as an example of how to be a certain way. And obviously being gendered, it does affect your coloring, meaning I see a man act this way. This is how a man acts. I say this because I had this experience in undergrad in this immalleable state of just raw, like I loved art. I went to school for painting, but the particularity of design and my subspecialty, I did not know beforehand. I just had a certain aim, but it was super vague, as I think it probably ought to be. But anyways, I met my instructor for typography was a man named Joshua Darden, and I literally witnessed this man's thought, and I was like, I love this thought. I want a mind like this. So, I mean, that's the dream in education. I find that's the dream and hope, is that there's an encounter of exemplar that gives you an orientation of your life, that regardless of how it changed, obviously you're never going to be a duplicate about your exemplar, but that thing they love, you fall in love with as well. And that shapes your orientation in your life from that point on. That's a very rare, I'm just saying for males, where is that? It's just nowhere. And I think actually related to this, I think the idea of joint attention is a very important concept, in the sense that men basically go, well, wait, why am I here? What is the purpose of my being here? What is the utility and function of me being here? If it's just, and this is actually a larger point of, quite frankly, built kind of, these are all my notes I didn't get to say in my essay, because it was just kind of extraneous points, but I think I didn't get to add it in the last conversation. When we're in algorithmic spaces of operation where everything's already known, don't think, just follow the trajectory, follow the protocol. There is nothing for you to think. You simply just need to follow the checkboxes and follow the protocol. And the highest moral claim is to check in with an expert, check into superior. So if your friend is a suicide ideation, no, your moral act is not to attend to this individual in front of you. It's a go call for help. That's your moral obligation. What I'm getting at here is that, quite bluntly, and actually men especially feel this way in their gender dynamics. It's like, oh, wait a minute. If I'm just supposed to show up, I'm just to show up and just do what I'm told to do. So why am I actually here? I'm just a moving acting. I'm just a moving body, just meant to do things. I think men sniff that and they exit. That's the response. They shut down, they exit. And silence is, by the way, a same operation of that. Or just not even attend in the first place. I think it's very important that when people go, oh, so actually I don't need to contribute. I'm meant to, like, my actual contribution is not who I am or what I think. There's nothing for me to think about. There's just me to operate on. There's you can't justify it. That's the thing. So the discourse requires a joint attention to a work, a discovery, a search. Aristotle talks about this. Discourse cannot happen without a search. There needs to be an inquiry. It needs to be something we're going towards. But see, if everything's figured out, oh no, we know what needs to be done. We just need gender equality. We need economic equality. Like, if everything's already answered, but we just haven't followed the protocol properly, then there's actually no more thought required. There's nothing to this debate about. It's just simply us versus them, antagonistic, remove the antagonisms, and we get what we want, and we have our fantasy fulfilled. And if the academic space is just a new religious space of eschaton, we need to build the eschaton in the moral space, in the material world. And the project of the academia is to just build good workers who fulfill the protocols of the algorithm. Then there's no thought actually processing. And I think it's a sniff test. Everybody goes, no, all right, then I will do what's required for this operation, but no more, no less, which defeats the whole logic of the liberal arts in the first place. To be free is to have free thought, right? And free discourse. That was his origin. That's one of his first thoughts or thinking about anyway. So I think the idea that we don't have a joint attention, I'm not surprised people exit. Actually, I'm not surprised that the move towards tech culture was on that exact ground. What's the reality of work? Money. Which has its own problems, because that's just symbolic value. That's just a symbolic demand. That's all that is. So so we're now stuck with, basically Instagram with images, right? Basically, the joint attention becomes fantasy images, or becomes the fantasy of symbolic work, symbolic demand as capital. So, whoops, we're all stuck in this virtuality with no actual joint attention of a project. Now, when Elon Musk was actually at first not vilified completely, remember at the very beginning, when he actually, for men, was just like, honestly, almost saving grace for us, for men. And when he was doing like, we're going to SpaceX, we're going to Mars, like that's very male coded in a project, a joint attention project of inquiry or search, of projection, right? Like going outward, doing a work together. I was pointing out, like, in terms of like why did men have a certain gravitation to that was because of this kind of, and everyone made fun of Elon for it, but this very like almost naive, new, childlike enthusiasm of outward strike or inquiry. And that's why a lot of men had a lot of inquiry for this. Now, the particularities of where that worked out, we can talk about, but I'm just talking through like the I'm not surprised academics, what's the inquiry? When we think everyone thinks they have the answers. That's kind of, I'm circling back the point. And that's why for me, I think like the investigation of beauty is so important because again, I think that's taken for granted. We already know what beauty is. Do we? When you actually start and then do the typical process, you do a Lancus, you realize we actually don't know. We think we do, but we actually don't know. And now how might it be to be a certain way to be beautiful, right? And all the projects of that. And by the way, listen, with my students, same thing. I actually, at least the last note related to this, if there's no joint project, then there's no external measure of reality. Why should we work hard? Like, what is the logic of the demand of thinking hard or working hard? Like, if we don't have an answer of like, well, no, because there's something we're searching for and that's rigorous, it requires a certain commitment to it. But if you don't have that, and this is just a simple operation of just algorithmic certification, just so I can get a paycheck, which is just symbolic work, of just exchanging resources for other resources, then what do I have to work hard for? If anything, the rational decisions do minimal work. Why should I change? Why should his educational experience make me change and do work that requires change? No, I should just be the way I am. Anyway, so we see these antagonisms kind of blowing up in the academic space. And the problem, and it's not like educators aren't aware of this, and we really wish it wasn't the case. We were very aware of it, but we're literally stuck with a structure, an incentive structure that we don't have any other way to, a lot of us feel like we don't have any way to respond to it. The battlegrounds are very small things, and the best you can do is individual mentoring to individuals, but ideally you build up to a larger structure, but that's a larger conversation.
No, magnificent. I'll throw it to Luber here and then Dimitri. There's a lot there that's very important. So first off, it would require part of the issue with the conversation about equality is the idea that if you don't have equality, you don't have justice, blah, blah, blah. There's also an idea, because I did work on Charles W. Mills on the question of Black identity, race, did a thesis on it, like what is Blackness as an identity? And you run into a whole lot of problems because there's a wonderful novel by Everett Purcell called Eraser on this Black man that just wanted to write fiction on kind of like Roman mythology and different things. And everyone's like, well, why would you do that? And he's like, because I want to. Where actually there was a kind of tyranny where as a Black writer, he felt like he was supposed to write about Black identity when really he wasn't interested in that. He just wanted mythology, right? And so, they actually made a movie of this, I believe, called American Fiction. And he, I think, did win the Pulitzer, maybe, this author. He's quite good. He married the woman who did Carcasia. But the idea is that there's a problem. If you assert a positive Black identity, then Black men who actually don't identify with that then feel alienated from their Black identity in the name of actually giving them kind of a belonging, right? And a lot of the literature and books we reviewed is about this very problem, the need to have a particular Black identity, because this was the other argument that Charles W. Mills points out. If you don't have a particular identity, you're talking about universal man. Well, he's like, well, that's just the European, the white European, right? All men are equal, but not everyone is a man, right? So there's this idea that universal man was code for white European, right? So you need to assert the particular identity, but here's the problem. And this is the tension we haven't solved. And it's the exact, in my opinion, it's the exact same problem with feminism, because you're trying to assert the female identity. The problem is, if you try to say, well, we're not going to have universal identity, well, aren't you just going to have tribal fragmentation and destroy the society, right? But if you say, well, we need a universal possibility or else we can't even have a society, how do you have a universal identity that is not fungible? That is not merely fungibility, as in Black and white are interchangeable, male and female are interchangeable. The million-dollar political question is the possibility of universal, a identity that is not bound to race, religion, sex, etc., so forth, that doesn't become fungibility. Because every single universal identity, historically speaking, has become fungibility, which of course means that universal is the logic of capital. And that's the problem. We only have universal identities that are basically algorithmic, right? And if you're simply debating that, you're actually accepted the imminent frame of fungibility. And basically, I do think the universities don't know how to deal with that. And that's also going to get into why I agree that you have to move towards something like beauty, because beauty actually makes plenty of space for particularity while simultaneously not over-determining people by their particularity, right? So you don't deny particularity, you don't deny race, gender, et cetera, so forth, but you also don't have people over-determined by it. Right, that's the sweet spot. Now, all of that has to be elaborated on. A few more quick things before throwing it to Luber here, and then Dimitri. What you're saying about joint attention is a big deal. I would actually argue that people don't really want equality so much as they want intimacy and joint attention. They want equality in so much as they want to be treated fairly by the law, fairly by opportunity, but really equality as the prime mover, the main goal. No one wants it. That's not what people want. It's just that people basically think there's no other greater good because they've never tasted a great conversation or joint attention or beauty. So it sounds right. It sounds right to say that everyone should be equal. Yes, but it depends on what you, of course, mean, right? Also to strongman, also too, there's a way in which there's a way also in feminism on this notion of the woman can make a paycheck, not just the man. There's also a sense in which there's a kind of longing for intimacy in this, because historically, if the only reason like that men basically felt wanted by women is because they can get the paycheck and, take care of things, well, then the woman's like, no, I don't need you for that. I just want you for you, actually. I don't actually want you for what you can get me or taking care of the house. Actually, I can do all of that. I just want you for you, right? So there's actually an argument that this can kind of open up intimacy, but here's the issue. If you open up a space of equality, but people are not able to have joint attention, it's not going to be enough, right? And in fact, when then you have this kind of free space of equal interaction, if it doesn't work, it's like, well, screw it anyway. What's the point? Men suck. Or what's the point? Women suck, right? It just turns around. So the ability, and I'm happy to expand on that point, but there's also a certain sort of potential in the feminist movement for an ending of thinking about relationships in terms of merely quantifiable gains. Like the man can bring the paycheck, the woman can raise the children. That's kind of quantifiable, right? Now, there's a kind of truth in the idea that if that's what you boil gender relationships down to, that becomes very problematic. But then if all you can do is deconstruct that, well, then we end up with the loss of givens and we're in trouble, right? And then ultimately you just get fungibility and everyone is just a great man is a good capitalist, a great woman is a great capitalist. The logic of fungibility takes over, right? So you need a positive vision in that, right? Well, the point of a couple is the experience of joint attention. But you can only get that through conversation and mutual coordination that is afforded by intimacy that, yes, is going to look like making a paycheck. Yes, is going to look like raising the children. But it's also not merely functionality. Is in an intimate experience of beauty where the two sides lose themselves in one another. And that's the point. The point is that, right? But we think about the family unit as an economic unit. We think about the family unit as what you need to be middle class, right? We don't think about the we don't think about the family as affording the geopaidic, right? As affording the joint attention and all of an experience of intimacy, beauty, and the social space of the fire, right? We don't think about the family like we talked about last week as the fire with E.O. Wilson, which has to be expanded on. So as a result, all efforts of simply restoring gender balance will simply be just moving around the algorithm. But here's the issue. People don't know how to get joint attention because that's tied to conversation. I'll say more and then I'll throw it to Luba here. To buy into conversation, perhaps it would be better to say people don't know how to complete a conversation. People don't know how to be satisfied by a conversation. It's just like Seth and Asperger, we were talking the other night. There's a point in the conversation when you feel it's over. Not because you're ending it or you're out of time. It feels as if it's gestalted. It feels as if it's saturated. It feels complete. Right? And it's not really that you end it, it's that it's complete and that the thing that it needs to be to go with you from the conversation has been achieved and now it will inform the next conversation, right? So there's a kind of completeness in conversation that is making way for the continuation of conversation. So by end, I don't mean finish off, I mean complete it in a manner that carries on. And most people don't know how to have conversation like that. And if you can't do that, you're not going to have intimacy. There's more to say, but let me throw it to Mr. Luber, Dimitri, and then Mr. Jockin. Mr. Luber, thank you for being here, sir.
It's very good to be here. Okay, I'm on a walk, so I've been taking notes in my head, so I'm going to try my best. Actually, let me just show, 'cause it's a beautiful day out today. Okay, so the first thing I want to say is in LA, anecdotally, Dimitri, I want to respond to one of your points specifically. I had an ex-girl, like not a girlfriend, but like an ex friends with benefits thing, whatever you want to call it. And I remember I had to take her to a private like gym session where there's like 10 girls. Remember thinking, thank God I am not doing something like that because I would not be able to concentrate at all. Like at all. So I remember after that experience, I'm like, I used to think women would get all dressed up for men. Like it's for men. But then I was like, why is that happening? Why did that happen? Because there's no men around, and it was far more from a male perspective appealing, let's just say. So I I kind of came to the conclusion that, and like talking to like my current girlfriend about it, because when we get dressed, like we always talk about like why this shirt versus that shirt, like it's fun kind of thing. And like a thing that I realized is that she wants to impress her friends, not guys at all. And that when a guy likes something, let's say, like I'll be really crude, those jeans make your butt look great, but your friends are saying that, and it's like, oh, these jeans are cute. Okay, these are cute jeans, and they're like, where'd you get those jeans? I want those jeans. Okay, odds, it just so happens to be the case that odds are the guy will also really like those jeans. It's like what satisfies the friend group simultaneously satisfies most likely the guy's desire at the same time. So I just think women go about it so unironically. I think the women that are trying to impress guys actually don't impress guys and simultaneously don't impress their own kind. Where I think women that are trying to impress women, their friends in particular, they end up impressing other people too. So take it for what it's worth. I understand it's a little anecdotal. I can't fucking say the word, but you get what I'm saying. So that's like the first note, which is that, and then I'll just make a claim about guys. A lot of guys don't try, like, there isn't the active, I'm going to wear this like, think about how weird of a control it is, at least in the heterosexual world for men. If they were to be like, I'm going to wear this jacket, and I think it's going to make my friends think that I look cute as shit. Like, there's just no world really where that's happening. And what typically happens is that the guy accidentally attracts the woman. It's an accidental thing because there's a lack of camaraderie on what is the joint attention within my male, strictly speaking, male friend group. Like the lack of a joint attention in that capacity leads to an accidental desire catching, so to speak, with the other. It's very accidental, less intentional. I think a girl, if their friends are thinking they're cute, they're feeling confident going out. They exude a confidence. I just think men struggle to exude that confidence precisely because they can't actually come together and say, look how cute these jeans look on me. Do you agree? And there's an actual agreeing or disagreeing that's happening. Okay, the other thing is in terms of, because I went to undergrad for philosophy, and at the time I was very interested in value theory, ethics, and epistemology, the intersection of all three. And I had a teacher who I've talked about a lot David Woolstorff, who I would say he was like an exemplar for me in the sense that, and I know why this happened. I would get into a lot of vulnerable states in class, meaning I would articulate something and I would say generous to call it an articulation, put it that way. It's a generous, like I sound like a complete buffoon. It's barely a proposition that's coming out of my mouth. I'm struggling to get my thoughts and express them with language. And I think the failure to express my thoughts in a public setting and it being accepted irregardless is what afforded my ability to see him as an exemplar. So I just kind of, it made me think that particular note, not saying I'm agreeing or disagreeing with anything you said there, just more a realization on my end, on that one. Let's see. The third note is basically, I think when we think about human rights, we think about it in terms of what is the limit of human rights and not kind of jock into our conversation with Javier and not so much the boundary of what human rights are. And I think that distinction is very important because when we're thinking about the limit of human rights, we are thinking about it in a very in an odd it's oddly construed because it's based off of, if you look at the history, I suppose, white man, but not just any white man, a white man of a certain caliber in terms of their certain they owned land or there's a certain religious orientation perhaps, like basically the movement was always for the sake of what you are not. You are not this, therefore you do not have human rights, and that what you are not is always based off of a particular kind of male. Where if you think about it in terms of like the boundary of what is the boundary condition for human rights, then it's more about it's more about the image isn't a certain kind of man anymore. It's beyond man or woman, and it's about more of that cognitive feedback loop between basically what it means to be a being in the world that you're currently in. And in that sense, you can't really think about it in terms of a particular subject anymore. And basically the point there is that if women are just trying to become men, we're only thinking about it in terms of the limitations of human rights, and we're not actually going to free man, even the white man, let's say in this example. So like if we're thinking about the boundary conditions of human rights, it is going to sublate even the white man's position. It is going to change the white man's position, where you can't just simply say women are, or some other group is embodying something that's closer to the white man. You would have to say, including the white man, that all possible groups are actually being pushed to another another dimension of what it means to have rights. So I think it changes all classes essentially, and you can't really compare within classes. Is the point. The fourth note I had was when you brought up that movie, which I saw, Daniel. That's right, it was a book. I forgot about that. It made me think of this book I read when I first started reading Heidegger, and I was like reading other books to like just to understand him and shit. Basically, I came across this book called Ontological Terror, and it's basically about how it's written by this guy, Calvin I almost want to say Calvin Harris, not the artist. But basically it's about how blackness is positioned outside of the category of being itself. So that he basically was making the claim that so the violence against black people isn't not merely like a social or political or even like historical thing, but it's a or social political attack. It's an ontological attack. That it's actually castration at the ontological level. It's an example of that and how that's possible and how we're able to do that. So you just made me think of that book, which is very, very interesting. And then the fifth thing that Jockin, what you're saying about joint attention would, and forgive me, I know no one brought up like the girdle point and all that jazz, but it's just making me think that to dwell in the girdle point, what you're paying attention to isn't the map that you are operating under. It has to be you overlooking something within your map. Like it has to be some kind of overlook motion where you're able to then have this intersubjective joint attention dimension that you can understand. Yeah. I think that's it. I feel like I'm forgetting something, but fuck it. I don't know. Yeah, I'll pass it back. Thank you.
Magnificent. I'll throw it to Dimitri, Jockin, and Aspasi here. So Simone Weil basically said the problem with human rights is you don't think people. And the problem is if the conversation about if we're stuck in a debate about human rights, that means you're going to be stuck between Isaiah Berlin's freedom to and freedom from. You don't get the freedom in. And so what ends up happening is when justice, freedom, and all these things are in terms of human rights, it becomes universal man, which is non-particular fungible man, and you get the logic of capital. Okay, and also the thing your map can never include is a particular person's face in a particular time. Like everyone here, right? I can only in an ideology entail generalities and vague categories, right? So dwelling in the girdle point is also going to be the encountering of a particular person, Levinas's face, and Simone Weil was all about actually rethinking human rights in terms of the particular encounter and counterology of individuals. And if you do not do that, you're going to end up in a lot of trouble. And yes, there is indeed, like if we look at Blackness, Visible Charles, etc., so forth, basically, and the Kyoto School, the Scottish Enlightenment, basically what we have is a giant ontological castration up against particularity in favor of universality, because that's the only way we know how to have like a global society that doesn't kill each other. But here's the problem. That ontological castration is what follows from our ability to think the possibility of freedom on the global scale. We know how to have freedom in a local community, in a particular gender, in a particular race. But when you start talking about freedom in pluralism, where each individual in a global pluralism has an experience of freedom we have no idea how to do that. I would argue it requires thinking the girdle point, the map is indestructible, beauty, etc., so forth. So that's part of the problem, is all of this is indeed framed in a logic of human rights, which entails a certain ontological castration. For Simone Weil, basically, this only is overcome. The only way you get the freedom in, and the only way to actually have real values is ultimately going to be based in some kind of mysticism. Now, what do we mean by this mysticism? It is not this kind of vague mysticism. It is the ability to have true, full experience, and I think is akin to the beautiful. I will also just say, lastly, as just a quick note, although I have many more notes because what you said is wonderful. I think actually also it should be noted, in my opinion, that most men are operating from an insecurity. Actually, even the ones who are getting a job and making a lot of money, they're doing that from an insecurity, because in the same way that a book like Eraser shows that the black man is insecure because they are like, I need to be a black man, but I don't even know what blackness is. Likewise, I would argue that problem happens for men. What is a man, right? Like there's a sense of if I define it, then that can be very problematic and close things off. And so you start looking for a way to have an authoritative speech by which to define what is a man. And that leads leads to then wanting to hide the ineptitude you feel in that weak speech, which then has either the lack of confidence of the hikikomori or the successful tech bro that is actually hiding a lack of confidence with using a project of going to Mars. Because human beings require a frontier thesis. We require a frontier to function, but we can actually use a frontier to run. As opposed to in joint attention and intimacy, the frontier is between us. That's when you don't run. So a lot of the conversation is from places of insecurity and nervousness. And I would argue the entire political discourse is isomorphic of this insecurity, because we have no freaking idea by which how to think of global pluralism without it turning into everyone is a fungible cog, or particularity ends up in tribalism. So the whole speech in every sector, it's all just freaking fractal. It is all just weak speech, and we don't know what to do. And from that, people are trying to hide that they don't know what to do, because the only way you attract someone is to show confidence, right? Not speak it, show confidence. So all you have, or to show power, or to show political might. A world of weak speech is then going to over-index showing, right? But this showing is egoic, as opposed to being shown the encounter of the beautiful, right? To be shown the fire, to be shown the light. I have more notes. I will pause and throw it to Dimitri here. Dimitri, please.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. Well, a lot's being expressed in the meantime. Yeah. So on the, I have to respond to this, the conversation about women at the gym and who are they doing it for. And yeah, I mean, thanks both Aspasia and Andrew for poking that a little bit. It definitely makes me think about the viciousness of intra-female competition. And I've been thinking actually last week about the difference between sisterhood and brotherhood. And yeah, what constitutes them? Because, well, okay, so I go to uni, mostly censor myself, and then when I'm home, like I'm talking with friends, I'm talking with men, we're talking about the issues we face, and I feel such a sense of brotherhood there. Um, and it is really like project oriented. Like that's always the man I just end up being friends with, because that's that's what actually makes friendship interesting and like valuable and long term. Uh, yeah, that makes it long term. And I mean that doesn't even have to be any like concrete project. That could really be like the search in a conversation. I think that's where it starts. And in that sense, it can start very small and like be singular. Like with some friends, you have conversations that you don't have with other friends, right? And this really is enriching. But they all have this direction. So yeah, I think the uni can definitely use some Aristotle here. Uh, Thomas, if you would like have a lecture and talk about this exact topic in my class, people would freak the fuck out. I'm telling you, I think they would like. I I think it's just so mad how when you were joking, when you were describing what you did, I felt like it's as if you live with me. It's as if you like have seen through my eyes, and walked around where I have been. And so yeah, like these types of experiences. When I start thinking about it politically, there's like demonstrations in the Netherlands now because they're gonna defund universities because they're gonna spend the money in militarization. And of course, like people are against it. But you know what? I start thinking, great, maybe this is actually the step we have to take. Exclude women from the military or at least combat services and what's related to that, namely the brotherhood and the project orientedness amongst men, like totally defund universities, invest all that money in the military, and from there and from within the military constitute a new vision and a new type of ethical ideal or ethical life that our civilization can uphold and strive towards. And I know that would qualify as an extremist statement for those who would like to uphold the Constitution, but really the Constitution is not holy to me. So yeah, I do think really institutions are collapsing, and so I'll just today this week I have exam week, so of course I'm quite stressed for it. But today we had an exam, and it was about phonology. And now, if you know anything about linguistics, phonology is basically where you get down to the most small, like minimal, how the most small and minimal sound differences have ramifications for the grammar and logic of a language. So things like morphemes, like inflection, conjugation, how that works on the level of sound. Like there's a mechanical system there. It's very interesting. It's one of my favorite things about linguistics, actually. But so we had an exam about this, and you can imagine that in linguistics, and particularly in this, it's very important not to make spelling mistakes, because every letter can change the entire phenomenon, can change the entire analysis of it. And so in this exam, there were actually 3 mistakes. And it turns out there were 3, and these were huge mistakes. And so people for like half an hour were super confused because the assignment was literally impossible. And basically, it turned out that the teachers made this exam last weekend. And that's why there's all these mistakes in it. And so I do think not only is the more deep and philosophical directedness of university as, you know, being for freedom or freedom of thought or however you want to put it, not only is that falling away, but because you have that falling away, you get this, I would say, like acceleration of work. Like we just have to do keep up the work and not have the conversation, but you know, we need to have a curriculum and fill it with lots of different things that might be totally unrelated. You get this kind of, yeah, also the collapse of like just taking time with things. And yeah, the pace at which I'm seeing university takes place, like, I mean, the teachers, like how fast they have to make exams, grade them, and then give it back to the students, and then they have to learn again for the midterms and the exams. Like I'm just gonna say, I took half a year to read Hegel's Science of Logic. That's one book. I took half a year with that book. I was reading it. I didn't understand jack shit. I was reading it again. I was making notes. I was talking with people about it who also were reading it. And then after half a year, I mean, that book will stay with me for the rest of my life. And yeah, like when you're reading lots of different things at the same time, which you just have to memorize for a short while, then be able to reproduce, and you don't talk about it in a more like goal-oriented sense, as you mentioned, Thomas. I think that really then you fall back on the acceleration of the work, and which is of course fungible because it's yeah, it's totally universities totally caught up in this system. And yeah, I think that will also make it so the quality of the actual work goes down. So yeah, like there's different sides on it, and some are more philosophical, but others are really yeah, like very materialistic, like empirically visible.
No, well, magnificent. Well, you know, you're not educated if you don't make the number go up with the amount of books you've read, right? The quality of engagement with a text is not the sign of being educated, but the amount of books you've read, which is very problematic, right? Because if indeed there's actually something about being educated that is more tied to a certain ability of attention, apprehension, thinking through things you don't understand, then a year on a single book that trains all those faculties is far more useful than 20 books that because you make the number go up, right? So yeah, I think what maybe it was Mortimer Adler who said something like, you know, a book. He did the great book series, but he was adamant, and Harold Bloom as well, because he hated Augustine, but said Augustine taught him how to read. And there was this real emphasis on this idea of actually you learn to reading one book to the death, basically, versus reading many books. Because if you read many books but don't learn how to read, it doesn't matter. Just some quick notes. I'll throw it to Jockin and Aspasia once he comes back. Yeah, the problem of young men, nations, is always the major problem that comes for nations in fourth turnings. What do you do about the young men? And most of the time, you kill them. You send them off to war and let them all die. That's how you deal with it, because otherwise you're in trouble, right? And I would certainly hope, and basically, if all we have are the vectors of the good, as we talk about all the time, and if we can't think this new political problem of global pluralism, that's just going to happen again, actually, especially in nations where you have so many more men than women, China, Japan, et cetera, so forth. Now, I do think this talk about China going to war, China does not tend to go to war. They tend to be, they don't even have colonies in their history, right? Like you also need to read the Red Kingdom, the Red Marsh, like their literature. It would be a larger conversation, but I do think there are some geopolitical misunderstandings of China. However, the possibility of something between China and Japan is what can be overlooked, I think, because they hate each other. Oh my gosh. Also, too, I think a lot of people are going to say one more thing on this. A lot of people saying, well, we're not going to have to worry about young men going to war because we'll have drones. All the war is technology. You're not going to have to worry about boots on the ground. I would argue that this is far worse because in a world where drones are going to fight, there's only two ways you win the war. You destroy all of the resources of the other side because they've destroyed everything building drones, or you psychologically terrorize the citizenship to the point where they don't want to fight anymore. Drone warfare is not going to be this. I think it's a massive mistake. This is my opinion. It is a massive, massive mistake to think that drones is going to be the end of human involvement in war. I would argue it will mean all humans are in war. It's not going to be the end of humans in war. It means everyone will be in war because the drones ain't going to attack one another. That's meaningless. They're going to attack the people, the citizenship. And the goal will be to psychologically terrorize the Americans because they can't even go outside anymore without maybe getting shot, or they're walking through the woods, they think they're fine, and their kid's shot, right? And that is incredibly terrifying. Drone warfare will be the end of the rules of war. It will be the end of the laws of war. Like the rules of war. Like there are rules in war. And the great Dr. Simkin talks about this all the time. Like war has rules, dang it. There are Geneva Conventions, there are kind of laws. And if you kind of go, well, they're all real stupid, and actually they just keep you from winning war, well, actually they keep war from spreading everywhere. And being everything. And drone warfare is actually just going to, it will not be the solution to the problem of sending young men off to die. It will be it will be making everyone a target. It will be the end of the distinction between the citizen and the soldier. That's my view. Not to say something terrible. Also, I just wanted to comment as well, and then I'll throw it to Jockin here. When Mr. Lubu was talking about the teacher that let him speak, you can only strengthen speech by practicing it. You need speeches. You need places where you can struggle to speak, not know what you're saying, and be allowed to do that. In the same way that you only strengthen your muscles by going to the gym, you have to start weak to get strong. So it goes with speech. And if you're in a world where you're not allowed to speak unless you're right, or you start off with strong speech, well, then no speech will develop. Speech will simply become reciting data, shutting people down. You'll have no speaking, actually, because there are not spaces for people to develop that, which makes me think of the communities of ideas that Christian was talking about with Peirce. Kindly inquisitors, spaces like this, you have to be able to strengthen speech. And also, what I would say as well is that the ability to speak, like the other thing that's just very interesting that basically there must be spaces where you can practice your speech to make it strong. And very rarely are you allowed to do that. And the fact you had a teacher that let you do that, kind of go through, like that's incredibly important. Because unless people have strong speech, they're not going to be able to figure out, and here's a kind of a key question because it's been brought up. There's something about intimacy and good dialogue that correlates with a feeling of searching, right? Like when you're searching. What is the difference between conversation that is searching and conversation that's meaningless? Because isn't there a way where if you're like, when you're having a conversation with somebody like this isn't going anywhere, right? Then it's kind of meaningless. And that's what I think Dimitri's pointing to, where men look for projects. They look for a sense of going somewhere, right? Well, this points to an old Plato question of how do you know what you're looking for when you don't know what it is, right? Like, how do you have the difference between searching and meaninglessness or not going anywhere? How do you sense that difference? Where does that come from? And it would seem to be that strong speech that deals with the problem of psychosis is speech that feels like it's advancing. But how do you advance? In what sense are you advancing? When do you intuit that you've advanced? Where does that come from? Because you usually don't reach a final conclusion, and yet nevertheless you reach a feeling of completion. What is that? How do you intuit that? Where is that coming from? These are all things that need to train, and I think it's authentic resonance, as Aspasi and Seth and I have talked about, and it is a certain capacity to have a sense that this is going somewhere, And yet the intimacy also comes from this, it's not algorithmic. It's not something that you can close down. So what is that sense and what affords that? Because that difference between a feeling of searching and a feeling of meaninglessness seems very, very important for intimacy. I will pause and throw it to Mr. Jockin. Mr. Jockin, please.
Just on a couple of things. I mean, first of all, one, here's the problem, right? That instinct of the martial response, right? That, oh, we could just choose the military to be the channeling of this energy. But here's the problem. It's the suicide rates. And I got curious about this because I just did a quick search while we're talking. Because Ukraine right now in the war, this is under exactly, they're a military dynamic right now. Trust me, their map has been solidified absolutely by the conflict. And you would think that under this pretense, now they got a war to fight, a thing to defend with what's going on with the suicide rates. And by the way, it was actually really, it was Ukraine's number, it's 13th in the world in suicide rates, by the way. Relatively high, even before the war. And it's actually gotten worse after the war, during the war. So basically, I think the problem is, what might happen is it's exit. But it may not even be by force, by external war forces. It might be by just self-exit. I think that's kind of the presumption. I think also, I don't think it's that accidental. Euthanasia has been emphasized or kind of pushed harder as a legitimate angle of rational decision-making. That, hey, you can self-exit. Nothing wrong with that. Sending us to the trenches. Yes, one way or the other. So I don't think the Marshall answer is showing empirically to should be any of this vivified reality. That's the part. The whole logic of World War II fascism was that, oh, we just build a really strong map and we have an other, we'll solidify our existence. And that's the point. And Russia with the Ukraine war is replaying that script. But these things like the suicide rates are showing us that's not the case. It's not causing this vivified culture of self-affirmation of existence of a culture and vivification, kind of Nietzschean mode. It's actually not working. Something deeper is cutting into the substance of man, where even those old strategies don't work. And this is actually why, by the way, listen, my project of the beautiful is on this point, is that these old accounts of the good are never going to work. It's not going to work. And yet, actually, I thought the Ukraine war is actually justification of this claim. And if China goes to war with Japan, and yes, or Taiwan, one of the two logical conclusions, same thing. There's going to be this appearance as if this is a vivified establishment of a map, an orientation, but it's actually completely self-defeating, of nihilistic runaway effects, basically. I think that's a very realistic outcome. And by the way, Daniel's critique point about basically the Elon Musk external project running away. I think that's very fair, because the point I was going to make is actually returning to the mystery of the human person. That's a very big distinction, because generally the project of operational algorithmic thinking is objects that are outside, material objects or acquisitions, not realizing the human person is not a thing to be captured, but a presence to be witnessed, right? And in terms of a flourishing out, letting be, kind of use Heideggerian language, a kind of letting be presence. I find that's I think a very subtle difference, right? And actually, this is the point I was going to make. The strike of the ontology of man is, what is a family? What is forget man or woman? What is a family? Because I think most people think it's just a legal entity of objects bundled together accidentally, when all traditional accounts have said family is an ontological object. It's not an accidental thing, not just a bundling of sticks. There's a reality that only in a family you get to have. That's not possible outside the family. It's the same argument why the state is before the citizen. It's the same argument. In the sense, Aristotle's comment about this. Your activity as a human subject is only possible within stern domains of reality. So it's a kind of, meaning you as a subject of a citizen of a state means you have a certain relationship to that possibility of space that you can enter into. But it's all true. It's analogously scale-wise down to the family, the same logic. Meaning, and actually this is the fact of, quite bluntly, again, the purpose of the man-woman relationship was to have children. There's a new reality possible because of these two things being bounded together, being held together that are different yet unified under one substance called the family, let alone all the projects that build from that. In terms of the joint attention, this is why I'm bringing this up. What is the joint attention? So if the joint attention of the family, and I've joked commonly about this in the past privately, family being not the shoes you wear on your feet for the journey of life with a partner, with a spouse, but the crown you put on your head after you're done. This is actually, it's a reversal of what the project was in the first place. Actually, and by the way, with the schools, what we're bringing up here, if you told someone, you know what you're going to do? You're going to read Aristotle, or you're going to read the Plato Dialogues. You're going to read the Plato Dialogues with no agenda, no learning outcomes. We're just going to read it. We're just going to read them. We're going to read the whole semester. We're reading these dialogues. And we don't know what we're going to talk about. And we don't know what the outcomes are. And there's going to be no tests. And there's no quantification. And by the way, trust me, the push on the schools for a feedback mechanism is absolutely essential, which is the slave of all teachers. Because guess what happens? Now you got to optimize your teaching instruction to include feedback mechanisms. But you don't have pain. If you ask people to write essays, for example, do you know how much pain in the ass it is to read 30 essays? Yeah, I see the reaction over there. It's the compression because we need a measure. And when we need a measure, it's the tip. I forgot the name of the paradox, but basically whatever you measure is a horrible outcome. Once that becomes your outcome, you're screwed, you're cooked immediately, because you're never going to get the thing you're actually aiming for in the first place. And in leadership, I always talk about this too. All the measures are important because they give you a context to reality. But if you ever think those measures are the reality, but simply signs of the reality, if you get that confused, you're done. You're going to get lost because you're going to game the system, and it's going to cause a compression of some kind that will have an obtuse effect. Because this is the point. Because actually, it is a big thing. I pushed really hard about memory being something in command of a human subject, like it's a thing of will that memory occurs. You know why I also say this? Because learning is not something we can command. You cannot command learning. I have no idea when teaching actually has the outcome of someone getting it. Like they have the revelation of, I got Plato. I get what he's saying here. Or I understand this concept in art. I know figure ground. I can show you 1,000 different directions. I can give you the exercises. I can literally put your body into a position to do the thing. But that kind of spark catch, no teacher, if they're honest, will ever tell you they can command that. We can't. We can only at best cause conditional probabilities. And it's always like, that's the point. It's like, you see, so this is completely antagonistic to outcome-based objectives. Oh, if I do X, I get Y. But see, any space of freedom doesn't promise you that. It only promises the opportunity it might happen. But it's no different than the family unit. It's the same like any space of beauty, that have a space that can allow for beauty, it has that same quality. It can only give you an opportunity for this. It doesn't guarantee it. Because if it's a guarantee, then it's a good being compressed into an algorithmic process to give you a quantified certain outcome, which is a good. No one's going to deny this. That's the point. So listen, giving students good rapid feedback is very useful. It's true. This has been empirically shown. And I know this is true. But the problem is that if we forget what's going on here, there's a price to be paid, especially if you don't think through the mechanisms of how that feedback occurs. You're going to get a compression of goodness, and especially when it's attached to an explicit outcome. I think this is why time is so important. If you put the demand of time into the equation, you're done. Because now it's only affected the good as possible. Because are you going to get Aristotle's metaphysics? When are you going to get Symposium? When are you going to get, like, you see what I'm saying? Like Hegel's text, Science of Logic. You can't predict that. You might take 5 readings. It might take half a reading. Who knows? You see, but this is completely alien of a possibility. It seems completely inefficient, unreasonable. But this is the tension. I wrote in the essay, kind of building from the last net session, this whole point is that the separation of the economic from the political, the moral, this is the problem we're running into. Because the economic wants that guaranteed outcome. I put X quantum work, I get Y outcome, right? And I want to be quantified, I want to be guaranteed, I want it as efficient as possible in the shortest time span, the minimal amount of work. But the moral subject actually requires all the antagonistics of that. Just like in a family, it's a boundingness of difference. Men and women, young and old, et cetera, et cetera. Actually being poor and then becoming wealthy, because that's the point. So like people treat the family as the outcome of wealth when it used to be the economic engine of wealth, like that, for example. So substances bound difference. They don't limit difference, they bound it. So that's this little language. I mean, I'm citing a little play with Javier and Luber about the difference between boundary and limit. Limit has a negative, to summarize what Javier's point about this, he's quoting from Kant about it. Limit is a negative stance. Boundary is a positive stance in terms of it's the same object. Meaning substances bound difference. So it allows different things of difference to be held together while destroying. But it's also a limit because it's the limit of difference, right, in terms of things. So it gives you both are valid. But the emphasis makes a difference of interpretation. So this is the tension. And this is all, and the institutions, the educational institutions and marriage in the old school position were these moral spaces of shaping education, of judgment. And this is what I'm getting at. Again, my essay talks about this, Substack. That's why I think that's why it was a 4-hour discussion last time, because it's such a deep topic. The cultivation of judgment, not just algorithmic protocols of a trajectory, preset that you just have to press the button of answer the multiple choice question, follow the checklist. Like you see all these, it's training you to be a kind of subject that doesn't think and treats memory as this kind of operational project of will. And is ignoring these other, again, things I push hard on, we don't get to own it. We simply get to get presence of it. What I mean by that is, again, you don't get to choose when you understand something. You do not choose. I would push back on anyone who claims they chose to understand something. No, you did not. Absolutely not. You did not. And also the special kind of memory of recollection that I talk about sometimes, of the thing of a partial object that calls a recollection of you. You didn't choose that memory. It came with you. It appeared in front of you. You respond to it. Your choices in response and all the aspects of it. But I push hard on this because it acts as if like we have full autonomy of our intellectual activity. That's not how it works. Partly because we enter into spaces that have effects on us. We're not this individual little island that has no effects of the spaces we're in. So I'm going a little over rant about that. But anyways, and it's, by the way, and I want to point out one last thing. It's not like, I think I should relate to this. I think that when I talk about the human person as the object of care, that is the mystery that we worked with, I think a big part is why I hold memory and care of each other matters the most. What I mean by that is recalling people's birthdays, getting them little gifts, writing notes if they pass. I mean the small things, like the office manager in my university, her father passed away. And people made notes like, oh, we should get something, we should get something. I noticed no one actually did anything. I got the card and gave her the card. And it was interesting because when she got it and then saw me next time, she gave me a hug. I was like, oh, it was a very human moment. And it's going to be, I think, in teaching. And actually, I thought of this when you talked about this, where you were kind of basically humiliated in front of your class by being authentic for a second. You gave a presentation, you forgot. You just couldn't help yourself. You were authentic in a point. It was that teacher's responsibility of the response to that moment that decided everything. Because look what you chose. Look what happened. They didn't respond in a moment of care of protecting you. That your account was legit, that this was a space for you to share those thoughts. And guess what you did? You exited. You're like, nope, that's it. Nope, this is not for me. This is not my space. I think that's actually really important because that's actually the thing teachers must be the most sensitive about is what is the space that we're creating? And those little acts are all the things. Everything's decided by those moments. Everything. And I'll stop with that.
Magnificent. Absolutely magnificent. There was a lot there that's very important. I'll give it to Seth here. Something very important that you're pointing out is that we do not choose when we understand. Well, classically, there's an understanding that education is at the heart of the possibility of a social order, a society, the political, et cetera, so forth. Well, if we don't know when people are educated, how do we know when we've made the possibility of a successful political philosophy, social order, et cetera, so forth, right? That's a kind of contradiction that right there makes it reasonable go in the direction of seeking feedback loops. Well, we got to, or like ways to quantify, right? Because otherwise we don't even know when we're making a society, right? We don't even know when we're making a nomos, like something that binds people together. So we've got to get feedback loops, or we won't even know if we're making civilization. But paradoxically, the suggestion here is that very act of making sure you're forming a civilization is that of which keeps you from forming a civilization. And basically, I would argue that before global pluralism, you could basically assure that even if schools or various jobs fell into the mistake of over-amplifying quantification, because your community, your family, et cetera, so forth, were actually still training you in the givens, then the consequence of this mistake was not there, because you would just absorb the judgment. You would just absorb the apprehension, right? But if the givens are not there, well, you are not going to necessarily absorb this understanding. And so what ends up happening is the procedure, the quantification, is no longer, there's not a given to hold it back anymore. And it takes over the whole thing, right? It takes over all aspects of human formation because there's no given to sort of keep it from spreading, right? But of course, the problem with givens is within them, you become thoughtless about your apprehensions, you become thoughtless about your understanding, and you may end up in the banality of evil or a norm that keeps out the other, et cetera, so forth, right? So basically, you get rid of givens to get rid of racism, xenophobia, all these different things. But in so doing that, you have this problem of then, well, we still got to, you still need education to make a civilization. And the only way a global pluralism would work is if you could somehow educate people into getting good at understanding the other, right? I need you to understand the other. Oh, but no one has any control over when people understand the other. Oh, so let's just get them jobs then. Let's just get them like technical skills, right? And AI is taking that away. So what now, right? So the political problem that's being pointed out, if we link education and politics, is that global pluralism has to get good at helping people understand, which we have no control over. Oh, so the same goes with apprehension, etc., right? So all we can do is prepare people to understand, or what I would call apprehension, because what you're pointing to for me is apprehension versus calculation. Like this ability to get it, this mysterious getting it. That is also the language of sitting around the fire, as we talked about last week, having in the center some sort of process that suddenly you have an image around the fire. You apprehend something. There's a lack that's not nothing, and then you, bam, you get it, right? That occurs. So all you can do is create spaces of social intelligence, social spaces in which that understanding can mysteriously occur. I can't make it a tool. Mr. Jockin, please.
Just to add on that, I mean, philosophy especially, it takes 5 to 10 years of cultivation to be able to even offer anything of usefulness. I generally found, and that's true in the arts too. It's this long incubation period. I think it's
Oh, it cut on me. I'm sorry. You were saying long incubation process?
Yeah, that's it. I was just closing by saying that. That's what I built in that point.
Well, completely. Okay. But that period of incubation and that ability to understand, I would argue, the only way to have universal not become a simile for fungibility, it's starting to rain and apparently our internet can't handle weather. So the only way to have, it never has it? The only way to have universal not become a simile for fungible is going to be tied to the ability to understand difference. And if everyone can understand difference, apprehend otherness, then you can have a harmony of the global pluralism, right? Because we can coordinate our actions via that apprehension in a manner where we don't kill each other, right? Well, if we can't do that, then it would be best for us all to just be fungible and to make difference more optional. But if you do that, that's the logic of capital, and then it turns out people don't like that, and they tend to rebel towards small fascist states because fungibility creates existential anxiety, because if I'm no different from anyone else, who am I? What is my community? Hikimorism, etc. Right? So this question that arises with the problem of the inability to know when people, and then I'll give it to Seth here, to know when people understand, is at the heart of the problem of an address for global pluralism. Because if global pluralism harmonizing is going to entail some sort of formation of subjectivity, and this kind of subject is able to understand, to apprehend the other, not calculate the other, but apprehend the other, then how do you gain that ability? Or how do you create spaces that increases the probability that that occurs? I would argue that what we were saying at the beginning, spaces of speaking, searching, and speech, I would argue that that actually is the kind of meta space in which one trains apprehension and understanding. It is in conversation that you actually train understanding, that ability to get it. I would argue that people are more likely to learn in conversation about a subject versus a test on a subject. I am more likely to apprehend Hegel, not just by reading Hegel, but when I can talk with people about Hegel, right? But that means I have to have a university that lets me talk and not make me feel dumb. And that means people have to have nervous systems that are able to hear ideas that they don't like and not blow up. You get an ethic of conversation that develops here, right? You get an ethic of how to hold yourself with other people, controlling the nervous system, as Seth talks about, the emotion, all of that. Like if we all do the work, breathing, as Daniel talks about, like if we all do the work to be able to hold the space of otherness so that conversation can unfold, the thought can develop, this becomes the space in which understanding is trained and apprehension is gained. And one is actually able to apprehend and understand at higher levels, if you will, and more skillfully. I do think understanding is a skill. I do think we don't know why we apprehend when we apprehend, but there are habits, there are emotions, there's ways of being that actually increase the probability that we do, or that we're able to see things or to grasp things. Why we do when we do, why it jumps out of the fire when it does is mysterious. But just because we don't know when understanding occurs doesn't mean we can't do things in our life to increase the probability that it can occur. It's just, that's what I mean when I say you can prepare but not plan. You can do a lot to prepare for the apprehension. You can't plan the moment of apprehension. You can't plan the moment of getting it, but you can do things to prepare for it. And one of the things you can do to prepare for it is to not get mad and to call people dumb who say things you don't like. So, Dimitri, I'm sorry that happened to you. So, Mr. Jockin, did you have something, sir?
Well, I mean, just one last note about that is, well, that's the danger, though, is that people go, no, we have to know. If it's not actual knowledge, I cannot command it at this time, at this place. You see that's the problem, is that there's a tension of, and I'm disagreeing with this point of, absolutely, it's actually in discourse that you come to understand something. I'm not disagreeing with that point, but even then, there's still no condition. And then more importantly, what happens if there's an impasse? Well, the people don't get it. Then what do you do? And then it's kind of like, well, what was the point? I wasted my time. You see, like there's these tensions because of the demand of quantification or guarantee of results, and people don't like the possibility of failure. Like that's just the tension about this. Let alone if, quite frankly, you have to have equal participants who are willing to engage. A chronic issue in education is that people don't do the readings. You come to a class, 50 people in the room, 5 people did the readings. What do you do with the other 45 who didn't do the readings? As for example, just to build on these points, is probably kind of give some tension about this.
Yeah, metaphorically, and Dimitri, like if we can't flip a switch, it's not real. That's the technological essence. If it's a fire, again, we were saying last week, a society is metaphorically trained differently when their main source of lighting is a switch, off and on. I can command it versus a fire that I cannot control that's dangerous and yet I see by it, right? We kind of mentioned that. So, but Dimitri, were you going to say something, sir?
Yeah. So I felt that was so well put. The preparing for understanding versus planning it, especially because I have exam week, and the whole point of exam week is you plan for it, right? And so, I mean, everyone at my uni is just going insane with stress right now, and it's weird but also funny to see. But I think just thinking about education differently in this way, it's just so alien to university, and I'm constantly in this split. Just how it comes over to me.
Well, I salute you for being in that split, and I'll throw it to Seth. But no, and again, one can the problem of institutions is one understands why they become quantifiable based, right? Like almost the logic of institutions must be feedback loops, quantification, et cetera, so forth, right? Especially if the demands of funding and so on and competition is there, right? But the issue is that incubation, that way of institutions being the way they are, incubates us and habituates us into a subjectivity that treats reality as if everything real can be planned. And if, in fact, the most important things can only be prepared for, and the most important things cannot be commanded on demand, well, then, and especially under global pluralism, because basically my argument is that givens in the past did the work of the capacities gained through preparation, even if we didn't have it, because they did it for us, because they kind of had the social order absorb those understandings. Well, if they're not there, we have to individually gain them, and the institutions are not doing that. And in an age of global pluralism, they then become pathological with weak speech, unable to make it strong. But I'll pause and throw it to Seth. Seth, let me throw it to you, sir. It's always good to have you.
Yeah, great to be here. I feel like I might be in that place that Andrew Luber was describing and not know what I'm saying, but feels like I can do that here. So that's, that's one of the things I love about the net. But actually, in a sense, I think the thing I'm most clear in saying right now is there's something about, and I've been listening, but I had to step away a couple times, so I might have, lost a thread here and there. I wasn't at the net last week, so there is a certain confusion. But I'm actually having this feeling like this feeling of confusion is a resonance that actually feels like a thread. It actually feels like a thread of belonging almost. I mean, we're sitting here talking about how confused the situation is for men and women, for, in the learning process and the economy. And just harking all the way back to the beginning in your question about freedom is, to me, I think that part of what I experience as freedom is like if someone does something, I think that person seems to be exhibiting freedom. It's when I see someone taking a risk. It's when I see someone doing something where they're willing to fail. And given everything else that we're talking about here, I mean, if I were to summarize a lot of what's happening in the institutions and what's happening in the economy, without being able to go into some of the detail that others have spoken to, I would just say that I feel like a lot of it is moving in an anti-human direction, right? It's like, and so often to be confused is the thing that it would be closest to feeling human, or to, know that I really should censor myself, but, oh, I forgot. It's actually a human thing to do, right? Because at a certain point when you're stifling what just feels natural, I mean, it's very confusing, because you can also get the, like Dimitri spoke to, you can be clear that, like, on some level, the smart choice would be to censor myself. I'm looking around, I'm seeing how things work, I'm sizing up the situation. Yeah, censor yourself, that's the right thing to do. But, on a deeper level, that doesn't work. I mean, I think to reassert your whatever feels most human is more and more to act counterculturally. I mean, I don't think that's true in all situations, but I think what can happen is the person who does something that breaks the mold, I mean, they can just find themselves completely isolated. But sometimes I think that's like the viral video or whatever. It's the thing where everyone's like, oh, thank God, been waiting for someone to like call bullshit on, what we're dealing with here. I've been thinking, again, sort of feeling just like I'm only tapping into the vibration of what's being talked to, but about men and women. So without trying to say anything specific about it, I'm perhaps in a turning point in a relationship I'm in. And so, there's all the specifics of myself and my partner, but then I've been zooming out and zooming in on like, how did I show up as a man, and what did I even think I was supposed to do as a man? There was an earlier point over a decade ago in a sort of a situation where something happened and a man accused me of being like, an asshole, not being a man or something. And I remember reaching out to my father and sort of saying, hey, Dad, tell me about being manly or something like this, whatever. He didn't know what to say. He had no answer for me. right? And then it was just like, huh? And more recently, I've been participating. People here know Jacob and the Resonant Man, and I've been participating there. And you know, we have a little chat thread that guys talk in between. And there was a couple people talking. It was kind of hilarious. Like, my dad doesn't understand what I'm doing in this men's group, and like, you know, the father's, you know, understanding of what a man is, and the younger and the son. But one of the things Jacob said was like, well, you know, we can go into a lot of things, but an easy way of talking about this is I get together with other men who, like me, want to be a better man. And what I like about that, and Jacob calls the group the Resonant Man, is like, it actually isn't a formula to begin with, but it's a kind of a confidence that if you bring a bunch of men together, there's going to be a certain resonance. Now, you know, if it was 100 years ago, there might be a lot of very clear, you know, bullet points that we could give that really would explain what does it mean to be a man or to be a good man. But like, you know, how do you define that today? You know, are you a good man because you're the provider, or are you a good man because you understand that gender dynamics are changing and you're actually adaptable and flexible for that? Are you a good man, you know, because you do what men traditionally have done, or because you're actually willing to, you know, be fluid and maybe help usher in the future somehow. Then this is maybe going to be random, but maybe that's a good thing. I just want to throw in two other things that sort of just feel like they're related to the situation, the conversation here, or maybe they're wild cards. But I've been participating locally in DC in an insight dialogue group. And so this is basically a meditative practice where, you know, pairs of people will slow down and report their real-time experience. You know, a typical thing is like, what are you noticing in your body? And the person will have 5 minutes to just report on what's happening in their body, report on what's happening in their body. And then the listener's job is just to listen, to not respond, maybe not even make too much facial expression, and sort of witness the other. And without fail, when we do this, people are noticing all these dynamics of speech that kind of don't get noticed in normal conversation, or all of these, like, the listeners often noticing, oh, I wanted to speak, but I had sort of just agreed to just be this, you know, blank canvas for 5 minutes, but I was feeling all these impulses the other person spoke. So we've been doing this for a while. And then last night we did a practice where a different meditative practice is mindful eating. So you like eat some food very slowly, like maybe you look at the little piece of fruit, you smell it, like we even did this thing, you try to hear it next to your ear, you know, then you touch it to your lips, you put it on your mouth, but you don't chew it. We slowed it way down. And then the innovation last night was we actually did this as an insight dialogue. So people were describing to each other the experience of slowly eating the fruit and like the feeling on my tongue and all this. And it was incredibly intimate. And I found that after we did that, I felt like the gap between me and the others shifted in a way that had not shifted by just doing the report on my body. Because like one man said, he's like, well, you know, when I do typical practice, I can get stuck in my head and I can just speak from my head. But when you want me to report on the taste on my tongue, I have to be in my body and I have to speak from there. So people were sort of sharing this almost animal experience of eating food. And yeah, I think maybe that just hits upon why I wanted to bring it up now that I listen to myself speaking. There was just something universal about consuming food, right? What's that like? And then the facilitator ended the practice by giving this guided meditation where she just basically asked everyone to imagine in detail, where did that piece of fruit you just ate come from? And starting with it being on the tree, and someone had to pick it, and someone had to put it in a box, and that box had to go on a truck, and it had to go to a factory, and it had to be packaged, and plastic had to be wrapped around it, and I had to get in another truck and go to the grocery store, and someone had to go to the grocery store and bring it, you know, here tonight and someone had to cut it up and now you ate it. And, you know, that's all just very human, but that's how often is that part of the experience of pulling some food out of the refrigerator and, you know, munching it down, maybe while you're looking at your phone or something like this. So that was one of the things I wanted to bring in. And then another, maybe it's just a wild card, but I've spoken to 2 different people recently where the conversation came up about taking care of the elderly. In both cases, you know, there was an elder parent and, you know, someone close to me just cared for her mother through her last year of life, and then she passed away. And it was an incredible experience for me to see, because I had also been, through doing Feldenkrais work, I'd been caring for a man who was in one of these rehab facilities, which, like, it's basically a warehouse. I mean, it's just awful. Like, this guy, you know, I would visit him like once a week, but he was clearly not being attended to. And so when I watched this good friend care for her mother through the last days, it was so deeply moving. You know, to see that. And again, just so deeply human. And so 2 different people recently that I was speaking to who have elderly parents, and I was sort of bringing up the contrast of what I saw in this aftercare facility and this other one. Both of them said to me, yeah, well, maybe when I turn 70, I'm off to Sweden. I mean, they were just basically saying, I do not want to do this. And, you know, I'm like, in other words, euthanasia, right? I'm just going to go somewhere where I can end it, because, but it strikes me. I mean, it feels tragic, but it also kind of feels human, right? Like, there is no longer a network of care that I can actually expect to access. I mean, I felt sad when they said that. I don't feel like I want to make that choice, but I kind of wondered, like, given the circumstances, is that a very human choice? You know, I don't know, but yeah, I guess that's what I wanted to end on. Like, there was something you said earlier, Daniel, about, you know, the real question is, how can we find the universal that still respects the particular? And what came to me, it feels a little maybe simplistic, but if you can sort of say, well, everyone I meet is one of God's children, right? That's potentially a way of doing that. Like, everyone has to eat, everyone has to, you know, deal with aging and health and all of these things. But I guess these experiences, like the mindful eating practice, or this, you know, like, you have to be confronted. I think we have to be confronted by the way we're losing our humanity, and someone has to say, wait a minute, you know, like, maybe like when Dimitri forgets to censor himself, it's just like, wait, there's only so much of this anti-human pressure that I can give into. And if I push back, I don't necessarily know that it's good for me in my immediate circumstances. It might turn out to be a mistake. I might lose my job. I might, you know, lose my peer group in some way. But on some deeper level, there's something primal in me that just has to say, no, like, I can't go along with this. And yeah, I don't know, but I've had this experience of, I'll end with this. I could say more, but I started going to the White House in DC and just meditating in front of the White House. So it's not a protest, but it's like, if there's a message, it's like, hey, can we listen to each other? So I just sit there in a listening posture. And it's been really interesting, the response I've gotten. I've had people come up and thank me for doing it. And they were just like, I'm like, how did that have an impact on you? I was sitting over here, you weren't sitting with me. Or they come up and say, you know, and I don't know, it just kind of came to me to do this recently through some of these kinds of experiences, but I didn't know what I was doing, you know, but I've been doing it, and now other people have come and joined. It's really cold right now, so it's going to be question, can I keep going through the winter? But a lot of people have really responded to it, and not to say that I've made some big discovery, but if there is something there that's resonating, I think it's just something really basic and human. It's like, are we just going to shout at each other, or are we just going to, you know, like, tear each other up, or can, like, we slow down? And anyway, starting to just reiterate my points over and over, so I'll end it here. But yeah, thanks for giving me the opportunity. I knew I would sort of figure out what I wanted to say as I was doing it. So, but enjoying being here tonight.
Well, we enjoyed having you, and that was wonderful. And you did make a big discovery. So it is extraordinary how much of a difference an activity can make, like meditating in a world where people have weak speech and they don't know how to speak with one another, right? That can kind of be the opening of perhaps learning how to speak to strengthen speech again. Let's see if it gets rain on this. I'll throw it to Michael here. So there's a few things. First off, there's a way in which the entire, like, we've been talking about how liberalism manifesting freedom as technology is freedom equals choice, and how this leads to various pathologies. The problem, and this kind of speaks to the map is indestructible, the problem with a lot of the talk on euthanasia is rather than admit that's a mistake, we'll say, well, we'll just give you the choice to end it, right? Like another issue, so there you go. So you're actually still free, even if choice and freedom don't work, because we'll just open up the choice that if it gets too bad, that you can just end it, right? Like another unintentional consequence, and I think the Catholic warned about this, if you create birth control, then if your society is no longer able to provide jobs by which you can raise a family, well, it's your fault. You could have used birth control. So as opposed to, you see, that's the problem with increasing options. It also moves the incentive away from the social order and the community to the individual. And if, you're not able to afford having kids, well, you chose to have them because you could have used the technology. So what you end up doing is offloading the responsibility to people, and that removes all incentive for the community to get its act together. And in fact, just all incentive to keep creating more and more technologies, right? Now, that doesn't mean the technology is bad, but you have to be, that's why the only way we're going to unlock the fullness of choice where it doesn't destroy us is the beginning of separating freedom and choice, actually, as opposed to conflating them. As opposed to thinking of freedom as choice, we have to think about freedom in choice. And then, of course, when we make the mistake of thinking freedom as choice, we just get stuck in a back and forth debate between freedom from and freedom to, and we never get to freedom in, which would be the sublation. So we get stuck in a dialectical motion. Also, I would just quickly note that what you were saying about the confused state, I would actually make the argument that I think basically all, I want to say, real learning starts from a certain aphoria, a certain confusion. Like one of the reasons why education can get so, doesn't work as well is because people know what they're going to learn, actually. Like they go into the classroom and they know we're going to study Shakespeare today. Walker Percy had that funny idea where he said, if you really want people to learn biology, then when they walk into the English classroom, have a dissection table sit there. And if you want them to learn Shakespeare, when they walk into biology class, have Macbeth on the dissection table. And what he was trying to say is that one of the reasons we don't learn is because we have pre-set notions of what we're going to learn that actually gets in the way of the thing encountering us, right? We're not surprised. We have boxes that gets in the way. And so there's a certain disorganization that is necessary, right? Like, one of the ideas of the net is you never know what you're going to talk about. You never know what's going to come up. And that precisely is what I think those kind of spaces increase the probability of learning the muscle of understanding and apprehension, as Jockin was pointing to. We don't have control over where we understand, but there are certain spaces that if you get used to entering into something and not knowing why you're doing it. Like we talked about reading literature the other day and the importance of reading literature as, I don't know why I'm reading Hamlet, but I am. That actually is like the step that greatly increases the probability that you learn how to, that you understand, that you apprehend. Precisely because you more and more enter into spaces that are not reducible to quantification. And almost by definition, the more you do that in order to, well, almost survive or to create intelligibility, you have to train another way of understanding, which is going to be apprehension. Like it's almost an environmental, just evolutionary necessity. Like if you're entering into spaces where you don't know what you're going to get out of it or what you're learning, the only way to kind of, that like evolutionarily in a way, the only way to like, thrive in those situations is to be able to apprehend things not on command, just kind of out of nowhere, right? Like in this kind of wild, apathetic way, right? That would be what would be adaptive for constantly entering into spaces that are not reducible to quantification. That's like that's an adaptive move. If you sit in front of the fire instead of the light switch, you need to adapt mentally to be able to apprehend things mysteriously. right? That are not just magically given to you by the environment, because you don't, well, that are not given to you by the environment procedurally, according to extrinsic motivation. So Dimitri, always wonderful to have you. So you kind of adaptively have to gain that ability, and literature teaches, and the phenomenology of the artist teaches that experience. And the more and more technology is at the center of your social order, the more and more you are not going to adaptively, as a social order, gain that capacity of apprehension. You're more going to adapt according to procedural logic, and that and quantification, et cetera, so forth. So confusion is human. Confusion, like that state of confusion, is actually the environment of which you adapt to, and the way you adapt actually is getting better at understanding, getting better at that mysterious moment when you apprehend, that mysterious moment when you get it, of seeing something that jumps out at you, like we talked about with Sam Green's story, The Mermaid. But I will pause and throw it to Michael.
Yeah, it's great to be here. I love the confusion is human idea. I don't think it has any correlation, but I just thought it's funny that one of the wisest men who ever lived was named Confucius. But yeah, so much to pick up on. I've just been thinking a lot about, as Daniel mentioned at the outset, I just finished A Tale of Two Cities by Dickens, and was just so captivated by the ending. It just had this like unbelievable switch where this person who was kind of, this like disreputable, down on his luck lawyer, late at night switches like drugs and switches clothes with this man who's going to die by the guillotine for a crime he didn't commit. And the man that he's saving is the man who loves the same woman he does. And it's just this like unbelievable. And then like in the backdrop of the French Revolution, where, kind of the world's going to shit around them, and there's so much vice and so little virtue. And a character who, for all of his kind of like passionate love he has for this woman, like, hadn't really displayed this kind of self-sacrificial courage. And I was just left being like, I mean, there's no wonder this is like one of the greatest novels ever written, because it has this story of transformation in such an unlikely place. And yeah, I think that's like that kind of strike, you talk about like the strike of beauty, the encounter of beauty. That was like one of the, I mean, just in recent memory for me, like one of the most palpable like feelings of that. Precisely because there was like this shock, there was this shock value to it. And the thing I found interesting in the novel too is like, Dickens like overtly has this theme of redemption and sacrifice. Like he quotes multiple times the Bible verse from John where Jesus has just resurrected and he's talking to Martha, and she's like, if you were here, my brother wouldn't have died. And he says, I'm the resurrection and the life. Do you believe in me? And at the end, it seems like, this character, Sidney Carton, like he grasps onto that idea of finally, for the first time, instead of wallowing in his own self-pity and his own kind of lack of meaning in his life, is like, oh, my life is meant for sacrificing myself so that this man and the woman I love, it's not explicitly stated, but you hope that they, actually live, happily ever after, and they and he made plans for that to happen. But also kind of more societally, like it ends with this speech that he gives before he dies, that's basically kind of this like vision for the future of France that he has, that he hopes that people remember him, and like the country doesn't decay into what it had already decayed into, which is another monarchy after King Louis. And I've just been, yeah, I'm gonna try and tie it back to what has been said, but I've just been thinking a lot about why that ending struck me so much, and kind of I made a video about it, and I mentioned non-rationality, Daniel, because I think it's such a great example of a non-rational move. It's like he stood to gain nothing by doing this. Like no one would have known that he did that, because the reason he was able to do that is because him and Charles Darnay were doppelgangers, so no one would have suspected that, he wasn't actually the person who would have been killed. And, he's protecting the man who loves the woman he loves. It's like what like, it's like it's pretty remarkable. But nevertheless, he he feels compelled to do this thing. And, I think it goes back to what Jockin was saying earlier about, like, you don't choose the things you learn. They kind of they strike you, and then it's actually kind of like this, like, I've had moments like that before, where it's like there's almost more fear in not responding to that, and not, like, heeding that call, or implementing that lesson, or whatever it might be, than there is in doing the thing that actually might be, like, existentially terrifying, that you're kind of, being confronted with. And yeah, it's like, they talk about in sonnets, like the volta, like the turn in perspective, like that there that that was just on display in this book, and in a way that I've never experienced before. Because usually it's like someone's either marked a hero, from the very beginning of the story, and um, like they may not necessarily be able to rise to that occasion immediately, but you kind of know, like, okay, this is the hero, right? Like, this is in Lord of the Rings. It's like, okay, Frodo's the one tasked with carrying the ring, and he struggles mightily in doing that, but he, like, has a network around him that helps him do that. Like, this book, like, it was not clear who the hero was. And he's like the most unsuspecting hero at the end. And he's really the only one who kind of has this, there's other virtuous characters in the book, but they kind of more or less have always been that way. He's really the only one who has this, like, epic transformation of character and of consciousness. And yeah, I think, in the kind of, and it's such a great, I think it's such a great skeleton for today's world. The beginning of the novel, like, it was the best of times, it was the worst of times, it was the time of wisdom, it was the time of foolishness, it was, um it was the time we thought we were all going to heaven, it was the time where we were going the other way. It's something like that. um and that polarity is like, it's, I feel it when I'm in the net, and then I go out into into the, the real world, and it's like, wow, like, you're confronted with the meaning crisis, like, all around you. Um, and it's like, how to bridge that gulf, how to hold the tension, how to be in the liminal space between the two. I was just having a conversation with a friend yesterday, and we were talking about, like, the the temptation of making spaces like the net, or spaces where, like, real creativity and like alignment towards beauty can happen, like the temptation to make that into its own idol, where you actually kind of inoculate yourself from the suffering of the world, let's say, the nihilism around you, and how it seems like, actually, to make good art, you have to have one foot in both pools. It might not even make sense to think about it that way, as like this dichotomy. Maybe it's more of like an integration of the two, and kind of always holding the light and the dark, always holding the poles, the tale of two cities. Like, part of what I talk about in the video is, like, as much as that existed at the time sociopolitically, like between London and between Paris, it also exists like, interior to us. It also exists within. And I think the magnificence of Dickens is like this character that kind of epitomized, the foolishness. He drank a lot. He was down on his luck. He then realizes the other side of himself, and he kind of like effectively like marries the two. And it's yeah, it's everything we talk about with nervous system regulation, with presence, with all of these things, to be able to enter those spaces and like stare the crisis in the face and like still have hope. I think like the virtue of hope, that there is a redemptive quality to that. And that can be a very non-rational thing to do. And a lot of people can call you crazy for that. You may even feel that yourself. But that seems like what this character was able to do at the end, and not just kind of succumbing to the fact that this guy who was wrongfully convicted was just going to die on the guillotine, and deciding to step in. But yeah, I'll stop blabbering on about this book, but I'm sure everyone's probably read it already. But yeah, pass it back.
No, it's a masterpiece, and you said a lot there that's important, and it is very interesting. So it is very interesting in kind of whether it be in religions or mythology or different things, how often an act of sacrifice that is not reducible to a rational calculus is the thing we praise the most as a society. And also that seems to be the only way to change the direction of forces that don't seem able to stop themselves, right? And to me, that idea that the sacrifice is the non-rational. We talk all the time about how the non-rational is the only way to deal with rational impasses, mass equilibria, the logic of capital heading toward AI. You have to have something non-rational to change it. Well, you could argue the history of sacrifice in literature, sacrifice in ritual. All of these things have actually been societies that have had a sense of this reality, that we literally can't stop where we're going unless someone does that of which is not intelligible, right? Because what the character does in the TLC, it's not really intelligible. Why would you do this thing? And yet, isn't it odd that once you see it, it's clearly the beautiful, right? And what's very interesting is it the good, right? Like, is it the good? And yes, it's good, but it also seems elevated from the good of the political revolutionists in the French Revolution, or it seems different. Because everyone in A Tale of Two Cities is doing what they believe is good, right? That's the problem. Sacrifice is a kind of strike, a certain sort of intersection of a higher good, right? And that good is not reducible to logic. Therefore, like, beauty is a good that's not something you can reduce to a logic, right? And therefore, it's a sublation. It's a concentric circle it entails, right? It makes me think of, and also too, like you're saying with the net, yeah, spaces like this can be escapist. That's why the girdle point, like, you must never forget that the girdle point does not leave the map behind. It is in the map. It entails the map, and you have to go back to the symbolic. You need both, right? Like, you need to be able to think maps, operate according to maps, not have a kind of cheap perennialism where you say all maps are the same. No, you have to know maps. You have to be able to interact with the social. You need to go into the universities, per se. But if you go into them, if you go into the Minotaur's lair, you need the golden thread. And spaces like this and kind of apprehension are the golden threads to go into those spaces. If you go into those spaces without a golden thread, per se, you will be habituated by them out of the capacity to think beyond their logic. That's kind of the issue, the sociological point, right? Like, if you don't have, say, the mystical and the religion, then the church may habituate you out of the ability to think the spiritual. But if you just have the spirit and not the religion, then that will habituate you out of the ability to actually deal with the plowsman, right? And then that becomes very problematic. So you have to have this bothness to check and balance your habituation. Like, you have to have the both to check and balance how your habits are being formed, how your subconscious associations are being formed, right? And if you don't do that, you end up in trouble. one of the things also just on what you're saying on sacrifice, I think about, there's a paper in Third Thoughts about Rene Girard, and there's obviously a lot of talk in Girard about sacrifice and sacred violence, unveiling the kind of sacred violence that holds the world together. And, and after Christ, the scapegoat mechanism doesn't work, and so on and so forth. One of the things I think, though, like I would also want to emphasize with Christ or just ritual in prehistoric society in general, is that it was not merely a satisfaction of envy. It was also the striking in of a choice that was not reducible to rational calculus. Like, ritual doesn't make sense. You're sacrificing all these animals. Why are you doing that? It doesn't make sense, right? Like, many of the Enlightenment people would look at that and kind of being like, that was really stupid. That was really wasteful. Well, in another sense, if without the non-rational you're doomed, that very wastefulness, that seeming silliness of religious activity and sacrifice and all of that is actually the introduction of the possibility of acting in a manner that is not reducible to rationality and logic, and that's the only way actually to keep the social order from eating itself, right? So sacrifice is not merely about the satisfaction of mimetic desire, it is also about the issue of rational impasses. That is something that you have to deal with as well. And what ends up happening is as you get rid of religion, basically you don't have spaces in your social order to introduce non-rationality or to convincingly make people engage in non-rationality. And at that point, you're just stuck to the rational impasses. You're just stuck in the Nash equilibria. And so there's something very profound. It's also very interesting to kind of think just on some stuff and if anyone has any final things to say this evening, please. It is interesting to think of the difference between, like, as a society loses sacrifice, it goes up in suicide. Like, that came up, Mr. Jockin was pointing to that, and that's very interesting to think. Like, how if you no longer have anything compelling enough to make you feel like sacrifice is worth doing, because God doesn't exist and the nation state is corrupt and there's nothing to sacrifice for, then what you get is a society where there's more suicide. And it's interesting to think that there's some sort of relationship there between the loss of reason to sacrifice and the tendency to commit suicide. It's interesting to think that relationship there. Some other things too. It's very interesting if you try to explain the protagonist in A Tale of Two Cities, why he did what he did. You almost have to appeal to an apprehension. Like, you have to appeal to say, well, it was the right thing to do. It was beautiful. That's not an explanation. You have to appeal to, well, didn't you apprehend it? Don't you just get it? Don't you just get it? This is also very interesting in great literature. Like, you don't actually explain, you can't explain why it was the right thing to do. You simply have to appeal to a getting it, right? The truth is, like, all social orders are actually held together by an appeal to getting it. And if people don't get it, like I remember talking with Tim on kind of education reform with Jacob, on this kind of idea that in classical thought, like the teacher would read or tell a story and then sit back to see how the students reacted. And if you had a student like who didn't get what was the moral activity? Oh, that's the problem kid. Like, we need to take him away. We actually may even need to banish him, right? Like, if they don't just get it, their ability to apprehend is broke. And if their ability to apprehend is broke, their soul is broke, and that's a threat to the entire polis, right? So it is just very interesting that in the great literature, there is this sort of appeal to, if I have to explain it to you, there's something wrong with you. Don't you just get the sacrifice was incredible? Don't you just get that it was beautiful and wonderful? Like, if you don't get it, oh my gosh, what's wrong with you, right? That right there is pointing toward this interesting dependency on an understanding and education that we don't control when learning happens, and yet we're completely dependent on the people around us having learned, having just gotten it. Right? So we're completely dependent on a mystery, dang it. We're completely dependent on the people around us participating in a mystery and getting things that we can't explain. And it's just that we don't usually look at this directly to know how often we depend on this. We think everything is procedure, everything is calculatable. No, we're completely depending on people getting things and not really being able to explain why. And if they don't, the social order doesn't work because people don't believe sacrifice is worth doing it, so they don't. And then, well, then there's hikikomoriism, suicide, and all these other problems, right? Like if people don't just get that there's a certain value and valor in this kind of self-sacrifice, we're done for, right? But why is it beautiful? Why is it have this valor? You just kind of have to get it, right? You just have to get it because you could easily look at the protagonist in A Tale of, and I'll throw it to Jockin, in A Tale of Two Cities and say, that was stupid. That was idiotic. Why would you do that, right? And you could say a society of the technological essence under capital and AI basically is the only way to think of the protagonist is as stupid, as not making any sense, right? They're not intelligible to us. And if someone like that is no longer intelligible to us, which perhaps a society that doesn't read literature doesn't train themselves to make that intelligible to them, as Seth and Aspasy and I were talking about, well, that is a society that is in severe trouble. But I'll throw it to Jockin here. Mr. Jockin, please.
I mean, yeah, the build on this, if there's no principle in which to orient the action, which has this perspectives of the future, I think it's also a very important aspect of it. You have to, the object of intent has to be something that's lacking. It's absent presence that only someone else who is committed to the same principle can see, but yet it's not present yet. To everybody else, it looks invisible. It looks like nothing. Lack is nothing. And it looks like you're doing it for nothing. But yet, but the thing is, and it's always this double-edged sword, because entrepreneurship is in its full essence, full spirit, is this exact proposition, is that the entrepreneur sees with new eyes a new possibility of creative activity, what might be the case, and then realizes it and reorders the whole organization and creates value by doing that. But that's very different from algorithmic operations of, oh, we're just going to metonymy slide. It's Uber for dog delivery. I don't know. Like you see, like it's X for Y. You actually see that discourse. So actually your language about weak speech is a good example. Weak formative, this is actually the example of why in the art, the reason why beauty is so important in the arts is it's actually through this discussion you realize that mimesis is not what art is after. Like, that's actually the big charge. What's the positive contribution of modernist art was to directly attack that argument. That if art's purpose was just mimetic copying, then it actually destroys not just beauty, but also all the other transcendentals. As I've said in other discussions why that is. But the summary note is that if it's just an imitation, you're just copying something that isn't actually there. So it's in falsehood, and it's not even good, because then you're falling into an illusion in the first place. So the point of the arts demonstrating the modernist arts is to show, no, we want the apprehension of a new reality, a realization in front of you, not just an imitation. So instead of mimesis, we want analogia, basically, some analogia realization in front of you. What's happening in economic discourse, and actually you can catch, this is why, Dan, your note about weak speech is demonstrated by this point. Look at the discussion, look at the rhetoric, the images of language presented in decision-making, and I know how action will be done. And the way you'll know this, because you actually know in business, it's all mimetic images. It's Uber for dog food. It's ChatGPT for this. Like you see, that's the language. You see the sliding. It's kind of this lateral sliding as opposed to flipping, right? Kind of the flip event. I think I was saying we talked about this before. And actually, the general note is education will always be doomed if it just thinks about just transitory, translational, imitational discourse, meaning just having subjects be conditioned to fulfill certain trajectories of an algorithm that are preset and defined. But actually, and it's not like educators don't know this. This has been discussed for like 20, 30 years now. The language of, oh, the jobs that exist today won't exist in 30 years, right? That language, which leads to an interesting discussion a little bit because it's just the same pattern. I always find this language of like forgetfulness of history, right? Because all this discourse today, we're done. This is the first time ever we ever dealt with technological disruption of economic activity. Whoops, like as if we forgot. This is like it's this rhetoric discourse about it has been going on like on loop for 30 years, 50 years, 100 years, take your pick. Whatever time sequence you want to use, you can talk about it this way. So I actually think in your original point, weak discourse, weak speech, I think this is actually demonstrated very perfectly where we don't even know what is a human person. We don't know what a man is. We don't know what the purpose of education is. We don't know anything. It's kind of, and I think that's kind of and we all think, oh, we just get better at algorithms and the AI will save us because it's the absolute knower that we don't have to know because it can know and it'll save us all from our ignorance. But little as you know, it's just going to, it's hell, as you say, Daniel, it's just hell. You're going to get stuck in a self-confirmational loop of optimization because the big issue is, and I'm writing an essay starting about this because I started going back into politics with Aristotle. So my political project I've been very quiet about because it's not necessarily my main emphasis. But, Aristotle talked about the necessity of a middle class because of the relationship of the mean. But what the algorithmic acceleration velocity is doing is basically, oh God, I forgot what it's called. But basically, when you take a mixed liquid, if you spirate it fast enough, it separates the elements, like the components within it. Oh God, I forgot the name of that. Not coagulation, but something else. That's what AI and algorithmic processes are doing. It's creating what's called binomial population distributions in classrooms or in political spaces. In spaces, it's causing distinction and pulling everybody to the edges, to the extreme. All winners, all losers, all rich, all poor, all men, all women, like et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We can't think that. Our entire political, we're always fighting the battle of the last war. Every war we're in is always with the mental models of the last war. Civil War, Napoleonic War. World War I, Civil War mindset. It's the same. There's always this gap of thought. We're in that moment right now. We're aware of something changed, but we can't help ourselves because our model of thought and discourse, weak speech, can't account for the new reality yet. So we got issues, and this is actually one of them. How can you have a political order of radical difference? It's being caused on, it's statistically coming upon us. There's no way around it. But if the answer is AI will save us, just individuated, differentiated AI, algorithmic operations, so that you can get what you want and not interfere with anyone else, and it can be Hikimorism, basically an accelerated form of that. Yes. No, that's not going to be it. In fact, what's going to happen is we're going to rupture because people are going to reject that because and that was a big surprise of last week's discussion. It's just like, I had this moment. I don't know if you had, I talk about unexpected surprise of understanding. I had this image in my head of, oh my God, this is ontologically by necessity. It will happen. That the choice freedom tension is ontological. This isn't even a historical development problem. This ontologically must occur. This failure must happen. It's just a matter of when, not if, but when. And when it does, we don't have an answer yet. We have no answer because the entire political discourse of logic of liberalism was on the assumption of a middle class. Because Aristotle's point is that the middle is actually where you can stabilize all the extremes. But what happens, that's the point. It's like we don't have an answer. And the economic environment is doing the same thing of not cultivating subjects to have not weak speech, but strong speech, or be a subject that can enter into girl points. The only answer is terms of service brutalism and this is my note from the essay. I'll close on this note, where and it really is the same idea. It's this idea of the sublimeness of the smooth algorithm that just satisfies all desire at all times with no friction, no thought, just consume, just in your choice of action of just smoothly go through life with absolutely no interruption or distinction or difficulty. You don't have to deal with friction or difference or issues because the algorithm will take care of it all for you. The algorithm's got you. The application's got it. And there's a problem, there's always someone you can call that will solve your problems for you. So you don't have to do anything. This is the trajectory. But there's going to be and that's the point. I call terms of service brutalism because that requires an abstractional object. of relationships, not the materiality of lack, of the reality of difference and friction. And when something interrupts of an error of some kind, and whoops, everything explodes, and no one's responsible because the algorithm by rationality did it. Not you, not any individual. No one was racist to you. No one was bigoted. No one did anything. There was no injustice done to you because the algorithm is our God. And it just in pure rationality, just is how it worked out. And I say this because remember, at that point, when there is a problem, there's no one to discourse with. And of course, the whole point is because there's no community. That's what happens. Like I think you had to know with your Hotels.com episode, you have this understandable emotional response that is just deafened silence. No one can help you. No one can hear you scream in space because no one's responsible. And you're the unreasonable one because you're upset at a computer. You're upset at an algorithm not giving what you want. This actually causes kind of a juvenileness. In the sense like we've been regressed because we can't respond to breakage of desire, right? Ruptures of desire or when things don't go smoothly. This is just the implications of it. So it's actually, your comments about all the time, Illich, about deconditioning, right? Basically weakening of the human person by these capacities. This is what the algorithm in terms of service brutalism is pointing to, is that there will come a time when the sublimity of the smoothness of the frictionless algorithmic space will rupture and fail. And in that moment of absolute brutalism, of like a human subject is alienated, absolutely. Like in architectural spaces that are of those concrete brutalism, the human subject is actually an annoyance. You can also see this because actually special spaces are antagonistic to human subjects, mainly because of like hostile architecture. They have a generalist, literally the human is just an annoyance of the smoothness of the operation. And these architects talk this way. Houses are machines for living. They quote this. Not from Corbusier. He's not technically a brutalist, but brutalists just took that language and thought and just carried it through. Isn't that interesting? A home is a machine of living, as opposed to a home is a space of life. Very interesting. Again, look at the language being used. The language reveals a lot about what people's relationships are. I'll stop with that.
No, magnificent. So there's a few things. Also on that automation, one of the reasons we don't want you speaking with a human, just the algorithm, the machine, the brutalism you're describing, is because weak speech. We don't know how to have strong speech. We can't handle speech. So we're going to avoid it by having you just interact with a computer, just interacting with the algorithm, so on and so forth. Also, too, on this idea of the human being the difficulty that gets in the way of the smoothness, I think, yes. So this is the question, a kind of a larger question. Metageometrically, is it the case that the wrinkle of the human affords negentropy, whereas pure smoothness is entropy? And then is the assumption that negentropy always ends in equilibrium false? Because actually the wrinkle maintains a self-turning wheel. If that is the case for the universe with complexity science and all of that, then it would be the case for individual lives, societies, and so on and so forth. Also, too, on what you're saying about the entrepreneur apprehending, right? Or they just slide, right? That's very, very important. Modern economics has ignored the solar residual. The majority of GDP is due to something we cannot make intelligible that people will say is creativity and entrepreneurship. Well, that ability then to apprehend makes possible 50% of your GDP. And we've ignored the solar residual and said that we can understand markets simply by demand and liquidity, but we cannot. We don't know how to create demand. In the same way that it's interesting, like when you're talking about modern art getting at apprehension, because you enter a historic age when you don't need the momentous or the replication because you have the camera, you have the photographer. So now we can interest in this question. So what exactly is art for now if we don't need that replication, right? Well, it's getting at this question of apprehension. I would argue that although perhaps there's a way in which we didn't finish thinking that project. There were people like, I do think, Eliot and so on, who Ford and so that we're getting at this and exploring apprehension, but there's a way in which we have not we've not brought that thinking into education, into church, all of that. We're not thinking about them in spaces of training apprehension. We're still actually in mimetic thinking, if you will, momentous, et cetera, so forth. Daniel, thank you for coming, sir. But what modernism was pointing to, you know, obviously Keynes is hanging out with a whole lot of modernists, and the question of what is demand and creating demand is also, there's an understanding in Keynes that we need to stimulate demand or we're in trouble, but we never answered the question of how to create demand. I would argue a lot of the modern art tries to stimulate apprehension, but it can't create apprehension. It doesn't know how to create that ability, that skill, that muscle. And that's what we're working on now. And I think we're finding that you train that muscle through conversation spaces, through social coordination mechanisms, geopedia, so again, modern art figured out how to stimulate apprehension, Finnegan's Wake and so on, but not how to create it. Likewise, Keynes noted we needed to stimulate demand or the economy would die, but we're still dealing with the question of how to create demand. And true entrepreneurs create demand. They don't merely stimulate demand. But if we are losing creativity in the system, then entrepreneurs are actually mostly just sliding. We call them entrepreneurs, but they're sliding. And I actually really like that, because in the same way that I'm extremely critical of how economists talk about creating demand, but really it's a simile for stimulating demand, and that blurring has made us stupid. Likewise, we call everyone an entrepreneur, but there's a radical difference between the sliding entrepreneur and the creative entrepreneur, if you will. Like, they're not the same, but we use the same term to refer to them. And like, I would argue that there's a way which the market right now is very, very uncreative, because it's all just AI. It's all just, that seems creative, but you're just actually using the same AI functionality in different domains. So you're just sliding it, really. But that's to be expected if we don't know how to create demand, if we don't know how to create entrepreneurs. What you're saying also about the political order of the political order of radical difference, which, yes, that's everything. How do you make subjects that can go into the girdle point, that can handle strong speech? This is also in belonging again too, where we talk about rhetoric versus discourse. Discourse is going to be weak speech. Rhetoric is strong speech. You know, the 2-2 will talk about voicecraft versus Kafka-likeness. Weak speech is Kafka-likeness. Voicecraft is the ability to have strong speech, or what we're doing here. This is the environment of which generates apprehension. And also, very important, the very fact that we don't control when we learn, that means freedom and choice are different. Because if we could choose when we learned, and learning and freedom go together. You feel free when you learn, do you not? When you go, oh my gosh, I can apprehend, I can learn mysteriously. When you feel free when mysterious stuff happens to you, that's when you feel free. When like mysterious stuff happens. Turns out, I think Seth's pointing at it, like freedom and risk go together, because the probability of something mysterious happens goes up with risk, right? If you, like, when you say, I'm going to go sit in front of the White House and don't know why, that's when mysterious stuff happens. I'm going to read this book of literature, don't know why. I'll risk wasting my time. I'll risk doing something that doesn't get me a job or whatever. That's when mysterious stuff can happen. And basically, people don't feel free. Freedom is not found in being able to make a choice and having options. It's found when mysterious stuff occurs. And that means you want a social order where there's mystery. And you see, religion could give you that. Like, religion had the possibility of mystery. We got rid of it, and so people don't. So then, freedom equals choice, as opposed to freedom is in choice that brings you to mystery. Because this is also, on this question of political order of radical difference, this is where talking about this issue of freedom and choice and these differences is very important. Because what the algorithm is, like, the algorithm is, again, return to a kind of freedom as being, not freedom as thought. And we talked last week as well, I should go to dinner, but this is important, is that we talked about dream equality, where thought actually wants to be a dream. That's what it longs for. It envies dreams. Because in dreams, I can do whatever I want. Thought is not bound by determination. And the first form of dream equality is humans dreaming to be animals again. Because an animal is freedom as being. It's just pure being. So it's thoughtless. I don't have to think. I can just be an animal. Kafka novels are an envy of animal likeness, of being an animal again. And again, there are many traditions that are anti-bestiality. They're against sleeping with animals. There's this temptation of the animal that you see in human societies resisting. There's a way in which AI is the completion of rationality's conspiracy to be like a dream. Because in a dream, I can get whatever I want, and whatever I experience in a dream, I'm not actually responsible for. It doesn't say anything about me, and I'm not bound to, right? So with AI, especially in a simulation, I'm fully realizing the dream of rationality in itself to be free from its own determinations, which I can be for when I'm freedom as an animal, I get, and then when I get freedom that equals choice. Because when freedom equals choice, then that actually is another form of freedom as being. Because choice is just whatever you want, right? So whatever you want just occurs. And also, here's a weird thing. There's actually no thinking in a dream. Because thinking, here's the weird move. In the same way there's no thinking in an animal, there's no thinking in a dream because it's all thinking. Because it's all saturated, it's all imagination. Because I'm very critical of distinctions between thinking, rationality, dream, and imagination. It's all the same mental act. Just in your head, it's all thinking, so it's not thinking. Because what ends up happening in determination, you start thinking because it's like Heidegger's broken doorknob. You notice a doorknob when it breaks because that's when it sticks out to you, right? You begin thinking when your thinking fails, actually, right? So when you fail, then you start thinking. The problem in a dream is because your thinking never fails, you never think. That's the weird thing to get, is in a dream, because your thinking always works, you actually are thoughtless because it's smooth, right? It's all smooth. That's what thinking wants. It wants to make your entire life smooth by removing all determinations, all inconveniences. Capitalism is the historic process of rationality becoming dreamlike that is completed in AI. And autonomous rationality is dreamlikeness. That's what it is. It's when rationality only has to refer to itself, and so it's dreamlikeness. And you'll be like God. And that's the mythological temptation, to be like God. And autonomous rationality realizing itself as dream equality means there is no otherness at all. So you're getting rid of otherness. So basically, we have to resist the temptation to make rationality realize itself in terms of dreamness, of being a dream. The distinction, if we are not able to think the distinction between choice and freedom and keeping them apart, then basically the smoothness will win out. That will be the only thing that will happen. The political order of radical difference will be concluded in impossibility. Basically, the way you deal with radical difference is give everyone their dream. Make everyone be a dream. Hikikomoriism is on the road to everyone just having their own self-relating dream, right? That refers to itself. And that's what rationality wants. Rationality wants to get rid of otherness. It wants to have an appearance of otherness, like otherness in a dream. What you experience in your dreams, is that you? If you're having a dream where you're running around New York City or something, is New York City other? No, it's actually you. It's your own thought creating an appearance of otherness that's not actually otherness because you're completely in control. That's what rationality wants. That's the prime accomplishment of autonomous rationality, the simulacra of otherness. And that's also when you're locked from the inside, and that's hell, right? So we have freedom as being, which is the animal. Then on the far side of it, we have freedom equals choice, which is dream equality, which is the AI singularity. That's where liberalism is going, which basically must be the removal of the human. Because the human is the possibility of adding the error, the possibility of adding determination, the break. Even if humans are still alive in the AI world, it will practically be as if they are not, because they'll just be carried by the smoothness. It won't matter that humans are around. They'll just be carried by the smoothness. They will technically be around, but not practically. And critically, as we learn in Hegel, the truth is the practical, not the tactical, right? So the very defense of the human requires the possibility of error. And the possibility of error is also the same space as the possibility of lack. And that is the possibility of otherness that makes the existence of the human consequential, right? So the political order of radical difference is between these two. Freedom as being and freedom equals choice. Well, here's the key issue then. We actually need freedom from being, pure being, But in that freedom, which is found in abstraction, as we talked about last week, you get then freedom and choice at the same time, and thus the possibility of confusing them as the same thing. Okay, so the question is, and this is where we talked about at the very beginning, the words like as, is, with, these prepositions are everything, because what the mistake is to treat freedom as choice. Under liberalism, we're doing that. And then the question of freedom is either freedom from or freedom to, negative freedom or positive freedom. And that's what all of the Western discourse has been between conservatives and liberals. Isaiah Berlin talks about that. Do you only get freedom from oppression and but you don't get positive freedom, which would be like healthcare, housing, and stuff like that, right? And Isaiah Berlin basically argues that Western political philosophy has been a debate between positive and negative freedom being like the freedom of speech, positive freedom being like healthcare and housing, right? And his argument is that you need both, but there's a tendency for positive freedom to eventually become tyrannical, because if I say you have a right to healthcare, then I got to force a doctor to treat you. I have to take away someone else's freedom to give you that service, right? And you have that kind of tyranny going on. Here's the problem. The political conversation right now unveils that actually neither of those is sufficient, because you can give people all the healthcare they want, and populism explodes in Europe. You can give them freedom of speech and leave them alone, but then people feel like the economy is failing and they don't have communities anyway, right, to have their freedom of religion or their freedom of speech. So these things there's a failure there, because ultimately the debate and fluctuation between freedom from and freedom to, negative freedom and positive freedom, is just a dialectical back and forth under freedom as choice. And that's not going to go anywhere. And as long as the political conversation is stuck in that, moving between positive freedom and negative freedom, then we're done. You're just going to end up in the AI singularity. What you have to think is freedom distinct from choice. But here's the key. Freedom without choice, that's either the animal or the totalitarian. So the question is the following. How do you find freedom in choice? Not from choice, in choice. So you needed choice, which afforded the possibility of the mistake, in order to have the possibility of freedom in choice. Freedom in choice is like commitment. I choose this, and in the thing I choose that cuts out my other options, I find freedom in the loss of options. I find freedom in determination. A choice is a determination of your own making. So instead of a determination that you're thrown into, a choice is a self-determination, if you will. So the key is, can you find freedom in self-determination? Well, how do you find freedom in a choice? Isn't choice the end of freedom? If I choose vanilla ice cream, there's no freedom now. I can eat the ice cream. I can enjoy my choice. But what does it mean to be free in your choice? That doesn't seem to make any sense, because all I'm doing is enjoying the choice, right? The freedom in the choice will necessarily require a qualitative relation to the choice, the way you relate to the ice cream, the way you relate to the thing you've chosen, right? Otherwise, it's not really freedom, it's just the experience of. Like, what's the difference between the experience of vanilla ice cream and, say, freedom in vanilla ice cream, right? Like, what does that even mean, right? Like, the experience of vanilla ice cream is that it tastes good or something, right? What do we mean to be free in vanilla ice cream, right? That would require some sort of qualitative experience of it. That would require some sort of way you undergo the eating of the vanilla ice cream, which is a silly example, but it would apply on the larger things, is basically it would allow a kind of experience of it that has a certain fullness that was beyond simply the experience of. And ultimately, what I'm saying, and I'll throw it to you, Mr. Jockin, is that the only way to have a distinction between freedom and experience is lack. Because lack is if every phenomenon lacks, then there's a possibility of a meaningful distinction between the experience of a thing and freedom in a thing. Because everything entails a dimensionality that is in excess of the raw presence and experience of the thing. And so the metaphysical dimension of lack is not nothing, is necessary for there to be a meaningful distinction between freedom and experience. And that lack is actually where we find the search in conversation, where we find the development of subjectivity. And that lack is precisely from which we are learning. We are learning from the lack as opposed to procedure over the lack. Because likewise, to make a better example, is when you choose a marriage or you choose, say, working at a wedding venue, how do you find freedom in working in that wedding venue as opposed to just experiencing the wedding venue? Well, because you experience it as beautiful, dang it. Like it is beautiful to you. And there's a freedom because there's this thing that is over you that's pulling you into a different participatory relationship that is higher than just the mere experience of it. You actually feel free in the wedding venue because you're not bound to the determinations you chose. Because the determinations are alive. They're creative. They're changing. They're not just given. You're actually able to participate in to make them something more. But that would only be possible if they were lacking. There was always something more that could be unfolded from them. I'll pause and throw it to Jockin here. Mr. Jockin.
Well, here, to take kind of like a kind of little silly point with the ice cream, but I'm going to build on this point. I think if you just make a slight distinction between experience and sensation, then this really gets off the ground. Because you actually, a sensation is only particular to you. It's to touch. It's individuated, right? It's only for you. And it's captured in you. And you can't even forget it. Because that's the point. Sensation just come and go. But experience is something interesting about it. Because actually on this note about ice cream, having a commitment to the ice cream, this would be something like, oh my God, this is amazing ice cream. I need to share this with someone else. See that? Why? Like, see, that's what's this is why. Actually, Seth's point about the choice in the chat, that freedom through experiencing your choice is beautiful. That's actually, I think, very reasonable because of this exact what I just pointed out. You ever notice something very beautiful you experience? It's not a sensation. As you experience, you want to share the pro-sociability disposition of commitment. That's a very important quality. It's the, as Daniel you said, what's the great saving power of beauty is to strike up the other. That does not destroy, but actually pulls you in and pulls others with you. You want to share it. So it's actually similar to the same. No, actually relates to commitments essential to this point. Because, for example, making a meal can be an act of slavery. I have to do this versus this is a very typical line for 7 habits of highly effective people. The have to versus choosing to discourse. That language changes everything. Because if I have to make dinner, now it's an obligation. Now it's a debt because of my father, I have the kids or whatever. But if I choose to do it, now the both are all true. See, that was very important. Both are true. Both are true. Which one is it going to be? It's going to be a choice. Dispositional state of which one it's going to be. Because if it's, I have to cook this dinner versus I choose to cook this dinner, now something opens up. You say choose because that's what happens. Now with the commitment, I want to have a great meal. I want to share this great meal with my family. Now it no longer becomes just the utility function of a meal to get calories into people's bodies because you have an obligation to feed your family. No, now it's this meal is an opportunity for an enactment of beauty because I get to share it with people I care about. And also changes. Also notice a big difference of like if I have to make a meal, I'm probably more likely just to do the thing and get done with it. It's a kind of it's a limiting, has this negative limiting quality. Versus if you choose to make the meal and it's about sharing, having a social experience with your loved ones, now just sitting in silence would seem actually grotesque. Because now the meal is actually not beautiful. How can it be? Because now you're actually denying what this could be. There's actually this oughtness, basically the lack is ought move is happening right there. Right. Because now the making of the meal is not just about utility function. Now it's about something beyond the utility. Now it's about having a discourse, having a communal sense with the family over a meal. That's just over food. So this is because the sensation or the utility function, those are just operations, right? That come and go and have no necessity with memory to it. Experience has a social aspect to it, has a memory aspect to it, has a social aspect to it, has all these other dimensions about it. So that's why your ice cream point, while a little silly at the beginning, a little wacky, actually points out that even the most mundane of things, which is why beauty is so important, even the most mundane and individuated and base of things can be transformed in beauty. This is an example of it. And that'd be an example of like, certain person makes some ice cream. It's absolutely beautiful. It's actually gorgeous. It's delicious, right? And you want to share this with other people, and then you get motivated. And that's the thing. It becomes almost a synth, kind of play some language here, a synthome kind of drive. Because now it's like, well, now I want to do this as my activity with my life. And now your labor, now your labor is not labor anymore. Now is it? Certainly not in the destitutional sense of a punishment. Now it's an activity of joy because you get to like produce ice cream, and then you get to the operation of producing something entrepreneurial. I'm just trying to connect that with that point about entrepreneurship. In this experience of commitment, commitment's actually, if there's any virtue that is absolutely missing in discourse, and it's not just in like typical discourse. I mean, even in the Aristotelian discourse, in Christian discourse, in Muslim discourse, it is commitment.
Yes.
It is that. Because they think the commitment is just simply submitting to the doctrine. They think that's the commitment. That's not the doctrine. That's not enough. That's just an operation of faith. That's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. However, to hold that at the end of the discussion, you need works. What is that work? It's commitment. So when they say faith, the salvation works with faith, it's because the work is commitment. And it's individuated, it's in the biography. And what makes you, it actually, and this is my stance, the story of biography of what makes a human is the story untold by their commitments in response to the constraints and limitations in their time and place. But of course, in the space of absolute choice, what's run away from that? When we say it denies the human, what it means to be a human person, this is what I mean, because it obliterates the possibility of commitment.
Yes.
Brief comment, but I love that because I think so many of us experience the idea of commitment as you're supposed to be committed. Like what you were saying, in a lot of contexts, like commitment is duty. But you could find, you could be in that space of confusion. You could be in the girdle point, but you could know I'm committed to seeing this through without even really fully knowing what the this is, but just like, and that's a really risky commitment, but it's something. I mean, I think we know what it is. Like it takes courage to actually listen to it, but when we do it, maybe in the simpler version, when we know we want vanilla and we don't want chocolate, but when we take that into the deeper commitments, like Daniel mentioned, the commitment to marriage or commitment to I'm going to move to another city, we commit to the potential mistake, but there's something that's going on there. So I just really love that distinction between, a sort of a rigid prescribed commitment versus a commitment to something being beautiful. It's like I'm committed to wanting this to be beautiful without knowing I'm going to succeed in actually getting there, but I'm going to keep aiming for it. So anyway, I just wanted to chime in on that. This has been a lot of fun.
No, I think what Jockin was saying on commitment, there's a big difference between people think they're committed because they follow a doctrine. I'm committed to the dogma of this belief because I believe it, or different things. That's more just following. Like commitment is somehow tied to I will see this through, right? And that also speaks to what was said earlier about this searching quality in conversation, or brotherhood with people who search. There's a way in which we're committed together to seeing this through. We together will see this through, so we have a unique relationship. But the key is the open-ended character of this seeing through. That's what makes it not a procedure. It looks like a procedure, but it's not. It's actually more, it has this lacking quality to it. The key, I think, basically at this stage in history is the things that are fitting for us are going to be very, very similar to the things that are damnation. The slight differences will be everything, actually. Like the slight difference between procedure and seeing through. Oh, well, that sounds like the same. Oh, no. Like they have on the surface, they have a similar appearance, but actually metaphysically they're different. But that's the issue. We're now dealing with metaphysical difference, which require a certain attunement that is not well being taught. So there's a few things. Basically, Mr. Jockin, in my opinion, what you're talking about, this characteristic of I want to share. Like I have to share this. Like that, like beauty has this evangelicism, this going out, this share, right? There's a way in which the reason why, because something else you said earlier I didn't touch on yet is, and this is extremely important, the realization that freedom isn't choice is an ontological necessity. Like, and there's only, that's exactly right. That's the argument. It's like, it's actually an ontological necessity. There's only two ways to deal with it. Find freedom in choice or get rid of the human being. Therefore, AI gets rid of humans, right? Like get rid of the humans somehow, either by locking them in a matrix simulation or hikikomori, or just having AI destroy human beings. Like if you are not able, you either have to handle and be prepared for the realization that freedom is not choice, or get rid of the human, replace the human, quote unquote, somehow. Also, and that's the only options. Those are the two only options, and we're just on the freaking edge of that right now, where that choice, that final absolute choice, lag is not nothing or lag is nothing, of which is going to manifest in either the replacement of the human being or the extension of the human being, quote unquote. But our extension, conviviality, as Illich said, is only possible if we find freedom in choice. Nothing under the umbrella of freedom as choice will suffice. Any political option under the umbrella of freedom as choice is our replacement, ergo, or our removal. That doesn't mean we're necessarily killed, but we are made irrelevant, is also the hikikomori, quote unquote. Very, very important. So we have to somehow find freedom in choice. Also, too, very important, the whole reason that dream equality has a hell to it is because you can't share it. Like you say, oh my gosh, this dream is amazing. So there's a way in which hell can be a beauty you can't share. Like a dream could be like paradise. It could be the most, AI could make the most amazing experience you ever had, but you won't be able to share it because you can't handle otherness. And precisely, this is that idea that hell is God for, hell is God when you hate him. Like this is what will happen in dream equality, like in the final realization of quote unquote utopia by rationality as dream and AI or whatever. It will be the supreme moment of you'll have this wonder that you won't be able to share. You'll be stuck with it. And it will be hell because you can't share it. And this is the key. We actually only find joy if we can share. And this is why humans are fundamentally social beings. And so everything we're making to be happy is only ultimately going to make us happy if we can share it. But AI is precisely the heaven we can't share. And that's why it will be hell. Hell is a heaven you can't share. And that characteristic of sharing is important. Mr. Jockin, please.
But I think that just that point is devastating. Because that is true. Because see, to get your fantasies gratified, but not being able to without others is useless. I just think of those examples. Like, wasn't there a thought experiment where they asked college students, "Oh, if you got to put in a vat in a simulation and you got everything you wanted, would you go in and you could stay the rest of your life? Would you go in it?" Like all the students, the vast majority said, "No, I don't want that," because there's something about that knowing of the isolation that violates something deeply embedded in them. And what you just said just so pithily just summarized the point. The reason why we know that's going to be hell, because you may get encounter of the wonder and not be able to share with anybody. That's devastating. That's why it's hell. And it's a hell by pleasure.
Yes.
I think that's also a very interesting part. So like the hellfire might not be what you imagine it be, what you initially think it is. The hellfire might be the horrible destitution of getting everything you wanted as a fantasy given to you and not being able to share it. And then all just turns around and just spins right on its head and flipped upside down. That's devastating. By the way, one last thing. So this thing about commitment, I've talked to other people about this. So it actually relates to autonomy, which is usually a concept I'm not that big fan of, to be honest. But if I'm going to be charitable about it, that's self-rule. Self-rule is by commitment by one's word. It's the only way you get autonomy. But how's that? But you need a reality to test the word. Your word requires external reality to test the word, to give you self-rule. If you do not have that, how can you have autonomy? So that actually shows you the algorithm that dream fantasy will destroy the human subject as autonomous entity under this model. I don't agree with this model, but I'm saying even under that model, it shows you it will fail. because it obliterates the possibility of what autonomy actually gets validated, which is through the commitment and validation of the word said by you. That's how a commitment shows up. When I say things, they occur. So let's just stop it there for now.
No, that's exactly right. Basically, liberalism would work if it was possible to have a heaven that you didn't need to share. But it is ontologically true that there is no such thing as a heaven you can't share. A heaven you can't share is hell. And liberalism is just heading toward, in AI, it is basically heading toward the realization of a heaven that is hell because you can't share it. Hell is a heaven you can't share, and that's what liberalism is generating, our political order. But here's the issue: if you want a heaven you can share, then, and what if, and this is, I think, true, heaven is only heaven to the amount you can share it. Like the degree by which heaven is heaven, a thing is heavenly, quote unquote, if you grant it beautiful, is actually to the degree you can share it, no more, no less. Well, then the degree of heaven is to the degree of radical difference you can handle. Like the amount of radical difference you can handle is precisely the amount by which heaven is heaven, and heaven doesn't become hell, because this is the key. Heaven and hell are the same thing, different to the degree you can share it, different to the degree you can handle otherness, right? That's what differentiates heaven and hell from itself as the same phenomenon. If you can't share it, and meaning you can't handle otherness, then the very pleasures and joys and everything you have turn into hells, right? They blow up in your face. And I think that's why we keep seeing in history the greatest nations become hell, right? Germany becomes Nazi Germany. The greatest civilizations become the worst civilizations when they encounter otherness they can't handle. Because then suddenly the heaven, the first world nation, the success, inverts into its opposite just like that. So it goes in love. Like relationships either become wonderful in people's lives or hell in people's lives. When they no longer can talk with their spouse, they can't share. What is weak speech but the inability to share? So the reason why all these political options are just reactions to weak speech and they're all forming hell is because they mean you can no longer share. You can no longer spread. You can't share. And if you can't share, that means you feel like you're in hell. You can have your middle class life. You can have your upper class life. There are so many very successful people that because they can't speak to one another, they have no ability to share with their spouse, or they don't have any friends. What are friends but spaces of sharing? Like friendship is a space of sharing. So the friendship is the political, and the political is necessary because it's the possibility of sharing. And basically, if you have no political, and I'll throw it to Seth here, if you have no political, then there's no possibility of having a heaven that doesn't become hell. You can have the greatest civilization on earth, but if you can't share, meaning you don't have a political, it'll be hell. And friendship is basically a space in which you can maintain share. But let me throw it to Seth. Seth, please.
Well, that just really hit me when you said that, Thomas, that a heaven you can't share is hell, because I've experienced that. And we've already spoken to suicide here. Like how many people who committed suicide actually experienced heaven, but could not share it. Just to give sort of the image of it, when I was in college, I didn't know what I was doing in college. I knew I loved music, right? Music was kind of like religion for me when I was growing up an atheist, but I didn't arrive at college with like a deep understanding of how to practice my instrument, whatnot, so that I could actually execute. Then I fell into this community of brilliant musicians, like doing radical things, like, like we're going to write a piece for multiple orchestras playing at the same time. So I'm hanging around this community. I was getting the most complex and incredible music I'd ever experienced in my own head, but I could not play it. I could not share it. I couldn't bring it out. And I don't know, as I felt that, I also I had a really visceral, emotional kind of resonance as I was listening to both of you. But I mean, maybe on a hopeful note, it just made me think of like, when you look at someone who's lonely, when you look at someone who's seems depressed, like maybe there's something that like they've experienced that is actually unbelievable, that's magical, but it hasn't been unlocked. It's like only they have it, so but like I could think of other examples, and I'm sure I just invite people to really ask if you've had that experience, you know, because I imagine people have, and I feel hopeful, almost like that this is a question that I might bring to someone, you know, who seems isolated. Like, what is the heaven that only you know about? Because, you know, like all of these people who are isolated might actually have, like, if they could only share what they have to share, what could that do for where we're at? So yeah, it's kind of like hit me hard, but I felt an optimistic note there I wanted to bring in. Yeah.
Can I just, on that one point, Seth, actually what Dimitri was hinting at with what his experience in school, where he disclosed something he wanted to share, and then it's the smackdown that actually causes you to get cast to hell. So actually, that's why it's a very valid point. It's like you have things, there's so many people that have things they really care about. And actually, oh my God, actually, I know so many stories of this, especially men. They have things they're passionate about. And then as soon as they're starved to share it, and then they actually are so twisted out that when they finally do someone talk to them, they're starving, suffocating to share. And it's all, boom, they just dump out whatever their thing they're into. And then they alienate the person because they're like, whoa, this is cool. Like, cool, bro. But bro, I'm not ready to receive this. And it's certainly empathetic because we understandable because, like, well, they didn't come in, they get dumped with this information or then they're you to see, like, but that intuition that I do agree with that. People have experiences of goodness in their life, things they care about, they love, they experience, and they want to share it. But then we don't have spaces. They've been smacked down, crushed, silenced, whatever, and they can't they're literally in a cage by themselves. They can scream and no one can hear. It's devastating. By the way, and actually this is a big note. Daniel, there's no about the friend. The friend is another self. Mm-hmm. But yet how's that possible? Because there's only one you. Mm-hmm. You see also right there is that even Aristotle's note about that. This is the same indifference, which is, by the way, actually multiplicity of experience, the many in the one, same as indifference. All these, the beautiful is a project. Again, my addenda, my claim is that Plato in the beautiful, and in Aristotle too, the beautiful is the training of all of this. The metaphysics of the highest level is trained in the beautiful, which is hilarious because it's always dismissed as like only the beginning. Oh, it's only the beginning. And the real stuff is the truth tables of logic. That's the real reality of philosophy, is truth tables of logic. But in reality, it's the beautiful that trains you in all this, because it's the beginning, but it's also the end. Because, for example, Greater Hippias, do you ever know? It's a very curious point about this line about why is this whole discussion of the different levels of perception of sensation, from taste, touch, the smell, the hearing, the sight. It's actually, I've seen barely no scholars ever talked about this, but I don't think this is an accident. Plato has that in there because there's a hierarchy of communicability, of shared experience. Your direct taste is only to you, right? Touch is a little more external. Multiples can touch each other, but only limited to, or a certain explicit group. Multiple people can smell the same thing, but only in a certain vicinity, right? Hearing, a larger scale. Many can experience the same thing. And sight is considered the highest in the sense. Highest in the sense of the highest multiplicity, but most multiplicity can experience the same. So, but again, the fact that the scholarship hasn't even bothered to talk about that. They just think it's just a joke about, oh, he's talking about sex. Ha ha. Like, they think it's just a comedy. When in reality, you're getting presented to you the ontological reality of this experience of the many in one, in the beautiful, and this communicability of experience. That something can be experienced yet not consumed, by the way. That's also why it's so important. You can all witness something and not to consume it. This is actually a very important detail. AKA also the note I've always said, the sunrise or the sunset. A beautiful sunrise or sunset, you want to share it. You have this impulse to share. But you're sharing your experience of it and wanting to share it does not consume and destroy it. So, and that thus, when that gets cut off from people, it destroys them. And it's constantly, and this is why spaces like the net matter so much. Because there's so many of us as we're little rascals in our little communities where if we didn't have spaces like this, we'd be all isolated. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I'm in multiple Discord groups, it's the same, it's the whole point. It's basically like the social space of online is giving us communities of sharing. We can share our insights, our perspectives. and it counts. And that's kind of the tension, is that, do you notice what's happened here? What used to be the university where this was supposed to happen has now slipped. But it's also been generally male-coded. I want to point that out too. Do you ever notice that? It's very male-coded. So that's interesting. So they're not in the university. Where are the, so closing on the loop is actually, shout out to Daniel on your note about like closing loops of conversation. Notice the men are they're still thinking. They are thinking. They're just not a university. Where are they? They're in these digital private spaces. That's what they are. I think that's quite interesting to notice that. I'll stop with that.
No, that's very, very important. I think first, the hikikomori, there, nothing that happens that is terrible cannot, in that terror, also not have the potential for its opposite, and which would be its redemption. So I do agree that it tends to be people of grandeur that isolate, that have a lot going on. That hikikomori people tend to have very active, they tend to be they feel deeply, they experience deeply, and that's precisely when they're hurt. They never want to be hurt again. There's something about mediocrity that doesn't isolate. Like mediocrity doesn't isolate so much. But there's something about also too, a lot of people who I run into who say they have Asperger or that they're mentally divergent, often my experience with them is it's more like, you're just too full of things and can't share them, actually. You don't know how to speak them. You haven't been taught how to talk. You haven't found communities that can handle you. And so you get labeled as having Asperger or autism or whatever, when really there's just a certain fullness that can't get out or can't be handled, or that when it tried to say everything it wanted to say, people looked at him funny and couldn't respond, so you withdrew, right? So again, there's something about the ability to share that is necessary for heaven, or else you isolate, like you just separate because it becomes hell. But then that isolation is basically giving up the possibility of sharing. So that becomes hell too. The effort to escape the pain of not being able to share, to give up on share, is not the solution. It's not the address. It's giving up. But it's a political option that people are giving into. So that's very problematic. I think what you're saying also with Aristotle, the friend as the other self, yourself as other, well, there's something about sharing that is a certain effort of extending yourself, a certain giving what you've experienced to the other. So it is a certain sort of, that's what's going on, that there's a certain level of alignment to the degree where, although you're technically different, you're practically not different. Also, too, the reason why it is so difficult to find freedom in choice is because you have to make a choice that your freedom is able to go through, not get stuck in. We're saying, like with the Asperger, there's a way in which it's stuck. The freedom can't come through. You have to get good at you have to learn wisdom and discernment to make choices where the fullness of your freedom can manifest through it, not get stuck. Right? But that requires wisdom and skill and virtue and all of those other things. Like all of those things, like virtue, there's something about virtue of which is the ability to make a choice where the fullness of freedom can manifest through it. Because a choice limits. A choice is it's a determination. Well, how do you make a determination that doesn't reduce your freedom, but in fact is able to manifest the fullness of your freedom, right? That seems impossible. Well, the whole work of virtue and friendship is actually to show, no, it's not. Actually, in commitment to see something through, you can make a choice that sees through the fullness of freedom, through time, through the commitment. But without virtue, any choice you make, so it's reasonable that people have basically conflated freedom and choice, or basically thrown away the possibility of freedom and just talk about choice. Because without virtue, it is not possible to bring freedom into your choices. When you choose to get married to someone, if you're not able to speak, communicate, then the marriage will feel like what? A prison. And you'll say, I was freer when I wasn't married. Well, no, that's just because you're not able to bring virtue into the relationship, where you can actually see in that commitment a greater freedom than the freedom you had as a bachelor, right? Because the bachelor has options. But that's virtue that transforms the choice into a freedom in choice. A free choice requires virtue. Because a free choice is a free determination. A choice is a determination. A choice is a limit. So a free choice is a free limit. So a choice is a determination. So like to have a free choice, you've got to have virtue, because that's the only way to find freedom in a determination, because that's the only way to make it beautiful. And the only way to make a determination free is to make it beautiful. And I do agree completely that all the metaphysics is trained in the beautiful, that it is primary. Completely agree. Also, there's something about sharing heaven that is necessary to test it. Because if you experience something as heaven, as truth, as wonderful, as good, and all of these things, beautiful, but you can't share it, then you can't know if that's just your opinion, your taste, a hallucination. You're not able to test it. You have to be able to test it. And if I can't share it, and here's the thing, if I can't share it, therefore go beyond simply a private spiritual enlightenment that only I can know, then I can't confirm its reality. And then the inability to know that it's real eat at you, right? Like the ability to know it's real is necessary, or else the heaven turns into hell. A heaven you can't know is real, which means you can share it and know that it's beyond your head, is one that you begin to wonder about and say, well, is this real, or is this just in my head? And the heaven turns into a torture, because all of the good things then feel like deceptions. They feel like tricks. And that's what's inevitably going to occur in a dream equality or AI, is that you're not going to be able to give it reality. The friend gives you reality. Like without an other self, you don't even know if yourself is real, actually. And so it goes with beauty. You have to share it, or else you don't know it's beautiful. And that lack of knowing that it's real then actually that eats at you. That becomes a kind of torture. And you start and it starts falling away.
No, just I think this is very interesting. You're presenting a heuristic of what is the good versus the beautiful. No? Because actually the big issue, a lot of times goods are going to be coveted. Mm-hmm. Presumed and possessed, but the idea of the beautiful is something to be shared. It's a very interesting instinct. I think it's a very interesting heuristic, because I think it's very robust, I would say.
Well, I'm so sorry to interrupt. The other thing that you said that is part of this, the beautiful can be witnessed and not be consumed. So I actually think ultimately, to put this very simplistically, what all humans long for is the experience of something they can't consume, which is infinite. Like the infinite is that which you can't consume away, right? You can't make it go away. If I can't share something, I can't know that it can't be consumed. Like when I share, because if I can share it, that means anyone can experience it and it won't go away, right? So sharing is the test that it can be witnessed and not consumed, per se. And actually what we long for is something that is infinite. It never goes away, because no matter how much you witness it, it doesn't go away. And we really do. We want to witness something more than have something. Like what people talk about is when they witness something, their daughter's marriage or the mystical experience. Like this is what people long for. People long to witness something more than to have something. But what we long to witness is something that doesn't end and that we can share. Ergo, it is not consumable, because if it can end, then it can run out. It has a consumer logic to it, right? Well, the only thing that doesn't run out that you can witness is, well, time, space itself, creativity. So what we long to is the form, the reality itself in its fullness, the gestalt of being is what we want to witness. And the issue is, if we can't share it, we long to share it to confirm it, because something that is infinite, meaning we can witness it and never consume it away, is that of which infinite amount of people could experience and it still be there. So we share to confirm. And if we don't share, we can't confirm. And if we can't confirm, we're anxious. We can't rest in it. And then it therefore loses its quality. And it comes to actually just be pretty. And then it becomes a distraction, and then it becomes a manipulation. And then heaven is a trick. And then heaven becomes a trick. Because you could argue in the Garden of Eden, that's what the serpent's kind of saying, right? Is like, God doesn't want you to eat from that tree because you'll be like God. Eden's a trick. It's actually a trick. It's to make you think that you have everything you want, but actually you're not. So Eden becomes a trick, right? So basically, that's what happens with a heaven you can't share. You come to experience as a certain trick. And basically the argument in this is the suggestion that it is an ontological reality that heaven must be shared. Thus, no dream equality, no AI will work. because no hikimoriism will work, because it is an ontological reality that would occur. Mr. Jockin.
It shuts down the beatific vision. Like that's AI is antagonistic. It's the antithesis of the beatific vision.
Yeah. Yeah, because it won't be shared. It will be, by definition, it works by making you not interact with otherness, because that becomes the threat. That becomes the thing that can destroy it. So the only way to have a political project of radical difference, it must be an ability to handle otherness. And the temptation will be these AIs that actually cut us off from the beatific vision. But notice in all of this, the prerequisite, and this is what we're getting at, and this is also why Belonging Again is kind of obsessed with speaking and free speech and all this other stuff. All of this is saying that the ability to share is heaven in a sense. Like, it is inseparable from the possibility of heaven, right? So basically, if that is the case, education should all be about sharing, like the ability to share. The society should be about sharing. Religion should be focused on sharing. The ability to share and to share in. And then what this ultimately is meaning, we have said that freedom and choice are distinct. That at the birdie and donkey no, refusing the choice, you unveil a new freedom. What is that freedom? What is freedom distinct from sharing? Sharing in, dwelling in. You find freedom when you share in something. Sharing and choice are different. So to say there's a distinction between freedom and choice is to say there's a distinction between sharing and choice. Which, of course, when I share something, I don't choose anything. Here's the weird thing about sharing. Sharing is a choice that doesn't remove the choice from me. Like, most of the time when you choose, if I choose X, you don't get X. Or if I choose something, I give up something. Sharing is choice that doesn't remove. It's sharing is a choice of excess, if you will. It is a participating in.
It actually opens a possibility space.
Yes, yes. And so freedom is this extension that opens a possibility space. And you see the great irony is choice closes a possibility space. When we've associated under liberalism, choice opens a possibility space, but it's actually sharing that opens a possibility space.
One thing I know, because I know you're using this language of externalize. I mean, I'm using the language of externalize, extension. I feel like there needs to be a third. Like, there needs to be almost, when I use the E's to kind of talk about this, like energetic, basically to kind of give a new possibility, a new activity of relationship that was not there before. Because that's the point. Sharing, because by the way, like, it's kind of like we practitioners do things without realizing why they're doing it. We just have vibes. We just go with the vibe. I'm only saying that because it's only now in discourse that I'm actually recollecting why Type Thursday is the way it is. So you ever notice that it has this protocol of sharing? And it has this, because it knows by giving people the choice to share, we're creating a space of engagement instead of pre-programming it. And more importantly, what's the sharing of? What are you working on? It's an indefinite project, meaning it's a project not complete yet. This is not the show and tell. I already did the job. Look how awesome I am. This is an inquiry, a search. It's educational in that sense. I'm in an inquiry. I'm in a search. This is what I worked on so far. This is what's working. This is what I think could be better, which I don't think is working. And you open up to the space to see what the response is. And in it's literally deliberative discourse. So this is what, and that's the thing. This was all. So that's the point. And it was designed as a space, and we have. The algorithm. This is always when I talk about the geopedic versus algorithmic, people want to do the hard split. That's never been the case. No, it's actually one just needs to work with the other, not like hard separation, because it's by procedures, algorithms, protocols, procedures, you get creation of spaces like that built around sharing choice. But you see that it requires certain tendencies or certain creations of permissibility for that. With risk, you don't know. And it's a big my chapter leads always comments, one of the biggest anxieties. It's like, who's presenting this month? It's anxiety, because you don't know. And you have to, that's part of the tension about this, that play with freedom within which on the last note, this idea of so then what is the family? The family is supposed to be a space of sharing. No, it's the commitment together to share this experience, this project and experience of family together, right? The cultivate virtue. This is why in the Catholic Church, marriage is a sacrament. It's supposed to be is supposed to help you encounter the beatific vision.
Yes.
So let's talk through that. What would that be? It's the beauty in the engagement of the life, the lived activity together that you're sharing together.
Well, I mean, the geopadic is the space that follows from the sharing of an indefinite project. That's what makes the geopadic. And we look at stumping grounds as people are sharing indefinite projects. And it creates a space. Like when you share indefinite projects, it creates a space. So the geopadic. So basically, yes. I mean, the third for me on the kind of sharing versus choice freedom, the sharing freedom that is the social distinct from choice is the geopadic, because the geopadic is sharing is the space afforded by the sharing of an indefinite project. Because when you share an indefinite project, it creates a space. The net does that. That's what happens. That's what philosophy makes possible. That's what a good family does. A good family creates the sharing of an indefinite project. It's not just like Ivan Illich said, it's not just an apartment we sleep at before going to our job. It's a space of an indefinite project, and that creates the feeling of family. And this is why you need community, because it's not that community is more important than the individual in the same way like it's with. Procedure is with the creativity. It's all with one another. Is that the geopadic, heaven, must be a space of sharing indefinite projects. But the indefinite project is where the individual comes in, because every indefinite project is individually made. It's done by an individual. So the individual, because now we think the tensions of, say, socialism and capitalism, the individual is found in the indefinite project. But the problem is talking about the individual without creativity and indefinite projects. Then you just get egoicism, right? The individual part of the equation is in the indefinite project, and the sharing is the social, and the space that creates when you have individuals sharing indefinite projects is the geopadic. And that is the only that has to be the structure of the political project that handles radical difference in global pluralism. Global pluralism has to have it has to entail a polis. It has to have the creation of the sharing of indefinite projects. And I will also know with that, like you brought up the synthome, like what knots the RSI, because what is the synthome? As Chetan has noted and Javier is working on, the synthome knots the real, the symbolic, and the imaginary, and therefore makes you're able to idiocentrically function with a knotted RSI, and the synthome becomes critical. What knots the RSI is something of which you're hungry to share. You do not get a synthome if you don't do something that you're hungry to share. Like Lacan talks about Joyce. Well, what is Joyce wants to share his novels. He wants to share his work. He's not writing Finnegan's Wake for him. He's writing it for other people, dang it. Like the artist, like all of Joyce's Lacan's examples are artists. Well, what do artists want to do? They want to share something. They make something that they share, right? So the only way to knot the RSI has to be sharing, right? So a communal synthome must be something that a community wants to share with itself and with other people, which has to be the beautiful. And it has to, and the beautiful is the experience one has in the geopadic, which is the space that is conditioned by the presence of a bunch of individuals with indefinite projects they want to share. Dang it. And that gathering of people with indefinite projects is also what creates demand versus stimulates demand. It is what actually deals with the solo residual. And so the synthome, the communal synthome, is going to be realized in that way. Mr. Jockin, did you have something to say, sir?
Well, I just had an image in my head. I always think about this that the child with the instinct of the macaroni art piece going to the parents.
Yes.
Right? That instinct of making and sharing. Right? It's just a primal quality of the human subject, of the human person. So I thought immediately of that image, right? Related to the synthome, right? That or the artist with the sharing. I say that because that's the point, is that this is so that the artist is not this like reified object that only a minority get to have access to. Everybody, it's because children do it with a high propensity of doing it, means that it's accessible to all of us, right? That we have this tendency of wanting to share. I want to point that out. And the other one is, to close the loop with this, it's the partial object.
Yes.
What is the partial object? It is both a person, a
Yes.
project, and a space.
Yes.
So
Yes,
it goes on to
completely.
the three kinds of substances.
Yes.
right? That are kind of within the Aristotelian Platonic mode you can talk about or reference gesture to. So that's what that's what I'm pointing out, that you're actually drawing both from all those ontological statuses of what is a substance, both in person, project, and space, in terms of a sharing space.
I'm of the opinion it's a larger topic, but just with meta geometry, great to see you, Seth. It's always good to see you, sir. Meta geometrically, basically, substance has to be fractal on all levels. So the very substance that makes a thing itself is also going to kind of structurally be what politics needs to be like, economics needs to be like, individuals need to be like, relationships need to be like, because it's all fractal. And basically, the partial object is what we're looking for. We're looking for a politics that is structurally like the partial object. We're looking for economics that is like the partial object. We are looking for that in marriage. We are looking, and that is indeed where space, space, the individual, and this kind of indefinite project, they all come together in that. And it's an open-ended, ever unfolding. And that's negentropic as well. And that's also the experience of the beautiful, of which is an excess to the true and the good, and yet also includes them sublatively. I will unfortunately have to run, Mr. Jockin. I have enjoyed this quite a lot, and as always with you. Basically, the suggestion is that whatever success we achieve as a society will only be experienced as a success to the degree we can share it. And what has happened is the political projects on offer have judged their quality according to how much success they realize. But here's the irony. The bigger the number, the greater the hell if you can't share it. And so by not taking seriously the possibility of sharing, successful political orders may actually be quantifying themselves in the amount of hell they create for people, because the way they generate that success is by removing possibilities of sharing, which is what I would argue the logic of capital, AI, technology, hikikomoriism has done. Like, in order to create success, we've made it more difficult to share. And actually, then when we look and say, man, we've been really successful, look at all the success we've made. Actually, all that is evidence of the greater experience of hell you've made, because heaven you can't share is hell, right? So this component of the ability to share becomes the necessary factor by which all success a political order generates can actually be experienced as success. And if we are living in a world full of weak speech, of people that can't talk to one another, then in fact, success, it might be better to fail, because the greater the success, the more torture. I would prefer not to fail, but basically, I mean, you could argue that the reason we're stuck in history repeating and all these fourth turnings and so on and so forth is because we haven't figured out how to keep success as experienced as success. Like, that's why you have generational decline. We don't know how to keep success as success. Well, I think that's because we don't know how to keep sharing it, dang it. We don't have the virtue to maintain it, and we're not able to actually speak with one another. I mean, why are so many people, like women and men, there's this hunger because they don't know how to share, dang it. They want to share their day. They want to share with one another, but they haven't been given the skills by which to share their lives with other lives. They've just been given the skills to get a job, and no matter how much money that job may get them, unless they can share their lives with others, all those higher numbers do is function as tortures. Mr. Jockin, always a pleasure, sir.